Chapter 1, Gone for Good. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, front page article off Daily Prophet. Bore Who Leaves. Is this the best thing for Wizarding Britain? By Rita Skeeter. Yes, my dear readers, today is the day that you are either dreading or looking forward to. Today is the day that Harry Potter is to leave the British Isles. Throughout the last month, when it became known that the Bore Who Lived was to leave, opinions have been varied. And why shouldn't they be? After all, the boy that we've all been hearing about ever since he did whatever inexplicable magic that caused He Who Must Not Be Named downfall all those years ago has been uppermost in our thoughts. Many of our children have grown up reading about our hero, Harry Potter. He captured our hearts and minds, more so because he disappeared so quickly after saving us all. And then, as you know, dear readers, he only resurfaced briefly when he was due to start Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry when he was 11. Yes, back then, we were all eagerly waiting for our hero to rejoin us. Many speculated on where he'd been, what hell'd been doing, what he'd been learning. The answer, of course, surprised us all, for Harry Potter hadn't been learning advanced magic. He hadn't been off having wonderful, magical adventures, being the hero we dreamed that he was. No, my dear readers, Harry Potter had been with his Muggle relatives, relatives who forbade his attendance at Hogwarts. As I am sure that you'll remember, there was an immediate outcry up and down the aisles when his rejection letter was sent in. Many demanded our leaders do something to counter that, to bring him to us by force if necessary. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case. Instead, our oh-so-wise leaders decided that they couldn't rescue poor Harry, instead being bound by the very laws that they swore to serve. Thankfully, our wishes were finally answered 8 months ago when, in a bizarre twist, the Goblet of Fire, the ancient magical object tasked with choosing the champions that would compete in the Triwizard Tournament between Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the Beauxbatons Academy, and the Durmstrang Institute, chose not 3 champions, but 4. And who should be that 4th? Why, no other than our boy hero, Harry Potter. But was this really for the best? One does have to wonder. For no sooner had young Harry returned to the magical world and Hogwarts than he began upsetting the natural order of how things in the magical world were always done. Our traditionalists especially were incensed at some of the things that Harry Potter brought with him. And I am not just talking about material items either, dear readers. No, I am talking about his ideas. This was no more pronounced than at the Yule Ball, held at Hogwarts for the 3 magical schools to celebrate the Yuletide. We were all suitably impressed when the whispers emerged from Hogwarts that young Harry was to escort the heiress of the ancient and noble house of Greengrass, Daphne. But that was until Harry Potter spat in the face of our traditions. Instead of wearing traditional robes to the ball, Harry Potter decided to wear Muggle fashion, an insult to not only the beautiful Daphne Greengrass, but to our entire society. Of course, you, my dear readers, are fully aware that this was only the tip of the wand of the Boy Who Lived's many snubbing of our society. The way that he tackled the 3 tasks of the Triwizard Tournament provides even more proof. Ah, yes, the Triwizard Tournament. I have already written countless articles on Harry Potter's so-called attempts at the tasks. See pages 7, 8, 9, and 11 for a reprinting of those articles. But for those of you who have been living under an obscurus curse, let me recap the first task. For this, the champions' ingenuity, magical prowess, and cunning were tested as they fought their way past a dragon to retrieve a golden egg. Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts, Fleur de Lacquer for Beauxbatons, and Victor Crumb of Durmstrang all proved that they were indeed worthy of their titles of champion, performing admirably. But Harry Potter? No. Our so-called hero chose to mark the task by deciding top into picture of the dragon. And if that wasn't enough, he then proved that he has command of one of the darkest skills imaginable, parseltongue. Yes, my dear readers, Harry Potter talked dragon into handing over the golden egg. That brings us to the second task. For this task, a hostage, someone special to each of the champions, was placed in an enchanted sleep and hidden at the bottom of the Black Lake for them to retrieve. Do you think Harry Potter used a bubblehead charm like Mr. Diggory or Mr. Lacker? Or perhaps transfiguration like Mr. Crumb? No, he did not. Instead, he went fishing and bribed one of the merpeople into retrieving his hostage for him. Finally, we have the third task, a maze filled with magical enchantments and creatures to truly test the champions. Not that Harry Potter lasted all that long. No, at the first opportunity, he fashioned some type of footwear to walk over the top of the maze before jumping out. After hearing all of that, I am sure that, like me, you are thinking good riddance to the boy who lived. Someone like Thatcher, cast from our society for the way he acts and treats our traditions and up-and-coming children. Ah, but here's the bludger that you didn't see coming. Harry Potter is indeed as powerful as we all imagined that he could be, a fact that he proved on his second day at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where, without any formal training under his robes, he was able to demonstrate wandless magic, the likes of which hasn't been since in the British Isles since the great Merlin himself. With that sort of talent and power, surely we want to keep the boy who lived here with us, if nothing else to merge his bloodline with the rest of us. Surely he could be taught his place and to respect our society and traditions. Unfortunately, that decision has been taken out of our hands. And by who, I hear you ask? Why, no other than the combined dragon reserves of the world. Inexplicably, they value his parseltongue ability. In fact, they want Tausate. Thus, they have offered Harry Potter as a dragon consultant and have even agreed to pay for him to complete his education. Which brings us to today. Today is that fateful day when Harry Potter, the boy who lived, will leave our shores to take up his post with the dragon reserves. I leave it to you, dear readers, to decide if this bodes well or ill for us as a society and for the wizarding world as a whole. 0v0, Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, dropped his copy off the Daily Prophet into his desk in disgust. Savagely, he spun his chair about, away from the offending paper, almost overspinning away from the calming view that could be seen from his window and back to face the paper once again. A judicious hand, flung out to the side to catch the edge of his desk, was enough to stop his momentum and to turn him back to the direction that he originally intended. He had been dreading this day, a day that he had never in his wildest dreams, nay, not dreams nightmares, would ever come to pass. Harry Potter leaving England, the very thought was absurd. But apparently, despite his best efforts, the boy was indeed leaving. You are the child of the prophecy, Harry, and it is time that you began to ready yourself to fulfill your destiny. When Voldemort returns, it will be here in Britain, and you will be needed here. Albus remembered saying those very words to young Harry right here in this very office not so long ago. In hindsight, his thoughts on how that meeting went were greatly in error. Had that he gotten through to the boy. He even told him of the prophecy, the one that bound Harry and Tom together. At the time, it seemed that Harry, however initially incredulous, had understood. Harry and Tom were entwined in fate, that nothing either did would prevent it, and that here, at Hogwarts, was Harry's very best chance to prepare. Even that, getting Harry to Hogwarts in the first place, had not been as easy as he first thought. Indeed, like countless children, Harry's place at the greatest school of witchcraft and wizardry had been ensured, written in the book when he was born. A letter had been sent to him at the appropriate time, inviting him to attend when he was 11. Alas, the fact that Albus had had to send Hagrid to personally deliver Harry's letter, when it became obvious that none of the others were reaching the boy's hand, should have been Albus' first clue that there could be some problems in his grand plan for the greater good of the wizarding world. And then had come the letter that had stunned not just Albus himself, but magical Britain as a whole. Harry Potter's relatives declined the invitation. Oh, it wasn't unheard of, Muggle-borns rejecting the invitation to Hogwarts. But for the boy who lived, Harry Potter of the ancient and most noble House of Potter to decline via his Muggle relatives was completely unexpected. The matter had even made its way to the Wisengamot, where, despite Albus' best efforts, his hands had been tied by the very laws that governed the world. The wishes of the guardians must take precedent. Oh, how Albus rued the day that he left young Harry with his last living family. It took 3 additional years for Albus to maneuver events into place to ensure that Harry would finally be able to attend Hogwarts. Thus had come about the Triwizard Tournament, albeit with a slight alteration on Albus' part. Even today, Albus was still surprised how much power he had had to pour into Hisken Fundersham in order to get the Goblet of Fire to choose not 3 champions, as it was supposed to, but for. Of course, with Harry Potter's name being the only one submitted for that 4th school, it was assured that Harry would come to Hogwarts or lose his magic. And come he had. There'd still be challenges, the boy being more headstrong and stubborn than Albus had expected, but the main thing was that Harry was at Hogwarts. He'd been sure that with a year at the prestigious school, making friends, learning about magic, that Harry's place at Hogwarts would be assured for years to come. Alas, that wasn't to be. The boy had openly defied him, Albus Dumbledore. And even with the knowledge that Albus had been forced to share with the boy, he simply left, without even letting anyone know that he was leaving the school. That had been a month ago, and try as he might, Albus had been unable to locate the boy since. He'd even suspected that he'd already left Britain altogether before this. Again, however unexpectedly, Albus was proved wrong. No, today was the day that Harry was leaving Britain and Albus was forced to, once again, begin searching for a way to get Harry Potter to the one place that he needed to be, under the roof of the greatest school of magic in the world, and under the tutelage of its venerable headmaster. 0v0, Augusta, the Lady Dowager Longbottom, paused in the entry to the small dining room of Longbottom Manor and observed her grandson. Neville had changed over the course of the past year away from home at Hogwarts. He'd lost much of the baby fat that he'd been known for as a child and was beginning to grow into his looks. And as much as Augusta hated to admit it, there was more than a touch of his mother in his face. As Neville had grown, she'd been tough on him, striving to instill in him the qualities that Augusta saw in his father. Frank had been an aura, full of power, loyalty, strength, and determination to do what was right. He had excelled at defense and transfiguration, both necessary skills in his line of work. But try as she might, young Neville had always disappointed her, showing barely a hint of what made his father, her son, such a great man. No, Neville seemed determined to follow in his mother's footsteps. Herbology and charms, the soft subjects. Those, as much as she hated to admit it, he had an affinity for, and it was for those subjects that young Neville had been chosen this past year to become a peer tutor to Harry Potter. Augusta could only assume that Neville's rise in confidence was directly related to the friendship that he had made with Lord Potter. That thought was enough to cause Augusta to frown. Harry Potter should still have been exactly like Neville, a 14, nearly 15-year-old boy, not an adult through emancipation. That adulthood had been bestowed upon him with the best of intentions, as a way to entice young Harry back to the magical world so that he didn't lose his magic, was understandable, however lamentable. But the ramifications for the Potter line, ramifications that affected not only the Wisingnut of magical Britain, but also the Board of Governors, both of which Augusta was a member of, continued. Currently, both of the Potter seats within those bodies were being held in trust by Elphia's Doge, an appointment that had been made by Albus Dumbledore, someone who should have had no say in such things. Even now, Augusta was uncertain whether Harry Potter even knew of the responsibilities that he had within Britain. Theoretically, Sirius Black, and there was another who was shirking his duties as far as Augusta was concerned, should have told the boy, but whether he had done so or not was anyone's guess. A small nod of Augusta's head confirmed that she would add those concerns to the next visit that she had with Amelia Bones. After all, the two of them had much to discuss and strategies still to decide upon based upon the letter that Harry had sent to Amelia via young Susan. The soft breeze blowing through the open window caught the edge off Daily Prophet, flapping the paper and catching Augusta's attention. While she couldn't read the headline from this distance, the picture of Harry Potter on the front page was clear to see. And that, combined with the morose look on Neville's face, reminded her of what the date was. The day that Harry was to leave Britain to become a dragon handler all things. As she took her place at the head of the table, Neville began pouring her tea for her, just as she liked it, and she nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Neville," she said, inclining her head. Seeing that the boy barely acknowledged her, she did something that she rarely did. She reached out and patted his hand. "I am certain that your friend will write to you." Neville looked up, and a smile appeared. "Harry did promise that he would," Neville replied. "He even said that he'd send me some magical plants from around the world." "That's very nice of him," Augusta acknowledged. "Make sure that you thank him properly if he does." "Yes, Gran," Neville nodded, and Augusta could see Alice shining in those eyes. Perhaps it was time that she acknowledged her daughter-in-law in her grandson, more instead of just trying to make Neville into a man like Frank was. It was something that Augusta decided to think more on. 0v0, Daphne Greengrass woke from a dream that felt so real that she automatically touched her lips with the tips of her fingers before Shed even opened her eyes. Unfortunately, she was forced to admit that it'd been nothing but a dream. Still, at least Shed experienced the real thing. Twice, even. The first time that they'd kissed was just before the start of the third task of the Triwizard tournament. Then, it'd been she who'd initiated it, catching the boy by surprise. It'd been worth it, though, feeling him respond, his hands coming to rest on her hips even as she cupped his face and kept him close. The second time had been a mutual kiss. This one had lasted longer, but had meant so much more. Their kiss had been filled with words that neither had been able to say, out loud, or even, at least in Daphne's case, to herself. The one thing that she most definitely didn't want that kiss to say was goodbye, even if there was definitely an element of it in there. No, saying goodbye to the boy who Shed come to care so very deeply for was not something that she was ready for, back then or even today. Not that she would get a chance to today. To be perfectly honest, she never expected to fall for him the way that she had. The very idea of him, of Harry, had intrigued her when Professor McGonagall had approached her to be one of his peer tutors. The boy who lived. The boy who never came to Hogwarts, instead remaining in the Muggle world. Shed expected him to be arrogant and uncouth, steeped in the Muggle life with no idea of how to act within magical society. Culture clash, Harry'd called it. And indeed, there'd been quite a bit of that, and it had led to some very intense discussions with Harry. The first inkling of it had been the day after he'd arrived, when he'd called Malfoy on his ideas of purebloods being better, magically stronger than half-bloods and Muggle-borns. And there was no doubt that Harry'd been right. Birth meant nothing in terms of magical power. Even Professor Snape had been forced to concede that point. No, thinking back, Daphne realized that she was wrong there. The first inkling of Harry's naivete of magical culture was when he blurted out the fact that he was a Parselton with no regard for how witches and wizards with such an ability were viewed in magical society within Britain. And then, even after the warnings to keep his ability secret, what did the great lump go and do? Talk to a dragon using Parseltongue in front of the entire school, journalists and magical Britain as a whole. But the biggest culture clash that the two of them had encountered was at the Yule Ball. Daphne's dream had come true when Harry'd asked her to be his date to the ball. What she hadn't been expecting was for him to turn up in a Muggle tuxedo instead of proper wizarding robes. Shed had to endure the ridicule and embarrassment of his appearance, not to mention the argument that followed between them for weeks. Even her own parents had weighed in, demanding that she distance herself from Harry. Somehow they'd managed to work their way through it, to gain a greater appreciation for each other and the culture that they came from. In fact, they'd come to such an understanding and appreciation for each other that they'd become more than friends. Not that Daphne could define exactly what they were, Regardless, what they were was all but over. Harry was to leave for the Dragon Reserve soon. No, not soon. Today. Rolling over, Daphne buried her face in her pillow, unsure whether she wanted to scream or cry. In the end, she did neither. She'd known that this day was coming, and as much as she willed it otherwise, it was always going to come, which was a large part of why Shed kissed Harry in the first place, because she knew that if she didn't, that Shed always regret it, always wonder what it would have been like. Sure, they'd exchanged a couple of letters already since Harry'd left Hogwarts, and there were promises that letters would continue back and forth. But really, she had to wonder at the reality. Could they keep even a friendship alive over such great distance and time apart? Instantly, Daphne threw back the covers, slid from her bed, and padded across to her desk. The only way to ensure that she remained connected to Harry was to connect with him, to keep writing to him, and hope that he kept writing back. Pulling a sheet of parchment to her with one hand, she grabbed a quill with the other and dipped it into the inkwell. Dear Harry, 0v0, the dragon tooth continuously spun in his hands as he fiddled. His eyes remained fixed on this singular object. It wasn't all that large, measuring just a little less than half the length of his hand, but what it represented that was another matter altogether. You ready, pup? Instantly, Harry's head whipped up and around even as his fist closed around the tooth and gripped it tightly. Yeah. Yeah, I am, he replied. But even with that answer, he remained seated on the lounge. The way that serious expression morphed from one of excitement to something softer, gentler, one of concern told Harry that all of his own doubts had come out in his voice. What's up? Sirius asked as he moved across the room to sit beside him, a large hand coming to rest on his back. I dunno, Harry shrugged, and that was the truth. He really wasn't sure where, was suddenly feeling apprehensive when, for the last month, he simply couldn't wait to leave England, to start this new adventure, to see and talk Dragon sagging. Hey, it's all right to be nervous, Sirius said softly. This is a big change. You're leaving everything you know to go to a brand new place that you've never been to before. But you survived when you left Surrey to go to Hogwarts, and it's not like you're going alone and won't know anyone there. Harry looked up from the floor and attempted a smile for his godfather. You're sure that you want to come with me? He asked. You're still getting your life back in order after all those years away. We've been through this, pup, Sirius reminded him. England and magical Britain can go hang as far as I am concerned. You are the most important person in my life. Where you go, I am going too. Harry made a face at him. Note everywhere, I hope. Yep, everywhere. Sirius emphasized with a nod and a great grin. You're never going to get rid of me. I'll even be there when you go on dates. Instantly, Harry's face fell. Dates. Just the word was enough to bring to mind a certain black-haired girl that had filled his mind, both waking and sleeping for quite some time now. And there was the crux of the matter. As much as Harry was looking forward to leaving England and going to the Dragon Reserves and the amazing adventure that it would be, she was the one thing, the one person, that he was reluctant to leave. The decision, though, had been made long ago, and they'd parted on extremely good terms. Of course, that didn't stop Harry from wondering what the future may have held if he stayed, if they could have become something more. You can still write to her, every week or day if you want. And there's nothing stopping us from coming back every now and again for a visit, Sirius said. Harry looked up at his godfather, surprised that he'd been able to read his thoughts, and nodded. Yeah, you're right, Harry replied. I can write and visit, and not just Daphne, but all my friends Nev and Hermione and Susan. Exactly, Sirius agreed, slapping him on the back. Now do you have everything? Harry patted his pocket where his trunk containing everything in the world that he owned was safe and secure, including Hedwig. Yep. In that case, we better go. Don't want to arrive late and Romani Istwo hours ahead of jolly old England. Together, the two stood, and Harry held out the dragon tooth to his godfather. With both of them holding an end of the tooth, Harry took a final deep breath. Ramaranth, he said. Instantly, the two were whisked away in a flash of light, leaving the shores of England, destination. The Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. Chapter 2. The Speaker Has Come. 6:45 a.m. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. Laughter, snickers, full-bellied and barking. All three different types were in abundance above him as Harry lifted his head, spitting out the dirt and grass from his rough landing. What the bloody hell was that? Harry snarked. Portkey, I did warn you, Sirius replied, still laughing. At least you didn't throw up, eh, Harry? A vaguely recognized voice said cheerfully. Harry looked up and around even as he pushed himself to his feet. The man who'd spoken was mostly hidden in the glare from the sun directly over his shoulder. What the sun did highlight, though, was his red hair, making it appear as though his whole head was ablaze. Charlie, the one and only, Charlie Weasley said, stepping forward, grasping Harry under his arm and hoisting him to his feet. That was some impressive landing, son, the owner of the Great Belly Laugh said. Don't rightly think I've ever seen anyone spinning that fast from a portkey ride and throw themselves near 10 meters away to land face first in the dirt. I am glad that I could entertain you, Mr. Velios, Harry replied sarcastically before immediately regretting speaking that way to his new boss. Thankfully, it seemed to have been taken the right way as, once again, Alexander Velios, the head dragon handler of the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, burst out laughing again. Alexander, Mr. Potter, call me Alexander. We're going to be working together quite closely for quite some time. In that case, call me Harry, Harry replied with a smile, shaking the offered hand. Mr. Black, Alexander said, shaking Sirius' hand as well. Sirius, he corrected. Right, well, get the two of you settled, and then Charlie here can give you a tour before lunch. Afterwards, the four of us'll get together and go over a few things, Alexander stated. Sounds like a plan, Sirius nodded. Thanks, Harry agreed before turning to Charlie. Come on, this way, Charlie grinned, throwing an arm out in the direction of a cluster of small log cabins. Before he'd even gone 2 paces, Harry thrust his hand into his pocket, letting out a sigh of relief that firstly, his miniaturized trunk was still there, and secondly, that it hadn't been damaged in his fall. Mind you, with the plethora of spells, charms, and enchantments on the thing, Harry would have been quite surprised to discover otherwise. Now, you two said that you don't mind sharing, right? Charlie asked. Yep, we're good, Harry replied, having glanced at Sirius. Good. Only, there's a rule here that a cabin can only be assigned to a dragon handler, or at least, someone who works for the sanctuary, Charlie stated. Any family or visitors have to stay with the worker that they belong to. I am just happy that I've been allowed to tag along, Sirius said. And technically, family does cover it, although he'll also be one of Harry's tutors. I know all about that, but that's something that we'll discuss later, Charlie replied. As they talked, Harry's eyes stayed fixed on the cabins that they were approaching, taking them all in. Most of them, maybe 24 in all, appeared to be a simple one-story building. Not only the walls, but also the roof were made of rough-hewn logs, which, considering the thick forest that Harry could see surrounding the sanctuary, made perfect sense. There were 2 small windows in the side and a tiny porch over the door. Harry knew woodworking. He knew design and was quite good at eyeballing dimensions. And these cabins, he could tell, were tiny. Definitely far too small for a single person to live comfortably in. They looked far too small for there to even be anything more than a simple open-plan room inside with the bedroom, or at least bed against one wall, living room, dining room, everything, all in the same space. He just hoped that there a separate bathroom in there. He'd hate to have to traipse from the cabin to a communal shower block in the middle of winter, especially this far north. This one's yours, Charlie exclaimed proudly. I am right next door if you need me, and the big building at the end of the lane. Here, Charlie pointed down the stone-lined gravel path to a log building that reminded Harry of something that he'd seen in a book once of a Viking great hall, is where most of the work Thattisn't with the dragons gets done. There's offices at one end and the mess in the other. Harry merely nodded, Again, not quite seeing how everything that Charlie was describing could fit in the building despite its larger size. And then Charlie opened the door to their cabin. "Ah," Harry said in understanding, his jaw dropping. Magic, of course. How had he forgotten magic? Just like the trunk in his pocket, the cabin was much smaller on the outside. Inside, the dimensions resembled that of an ordinary house, a rather large house at that. The front door opened into a rather large, open-plan room. Much of it was a living room with a couple of large double-seater couches and single armchairs placed around a low coffee table. A fireplace built of large stones, including the chimney which he could see jutting out from the wall, dominated one side of the room. The floors, as expected, were a deep, highly polished reddish-brown wood rosewood. Harry identified it as which complemented the soft, cream walls quite nicely. On the far side of the room was a small dining table with 4 chairs. Just beyond it, a servery sat at the bottom of a large rectangular opening in the wall. Shifting slightly to one side, Harry looked through it to see benches and cupboards and part of a stove, which led him to believe that, even though most meals were most likely expected to be had in the communal mess of the big hall, the cabins were designed for people to cook their own food if they wanted. "Feel free to rearrange the room if you want," Charlie was saying. "I know that you're going to have most of your lessons here, so you might want to make one part of the room more classroom-like." "I'll keep that idea in mind," Harry nodded. "Bedrooms through here?" Sirius asked, obviously rhetorically, as he headed straight for the doorless opening set in the middle of the back wall, leading further back into the cabin. Quickly, Harry crossed the room after his godfather, interested in seeing the rest of this magically expanded cabin. He wasn't disappointed. Space expansion charms seemed to be some of the most amazing magic that Harry'd ever heard of. Instantly, he decided that he needed to learn how to cast them and then apply them to his woodworking creations. There were 5 doors down the hallway, 2 to either side, and the last at the very end. The first door to the left was already open, and through it, Harry could see the kitchen that he'd thought he'd seen earlier. It was larger than he'd thought, but then he considered the fact that one wall was mostly not there, allowing easy access to the dining area over the servery probably accounted for it. Directly opposite the kitchen was a bedroom. While it wasn't super large, it was definitely a drastic improvement over what he'd once had at Privet Drive. A double bed was set against one wall with built-in cupboards with sliding doors on the opposite wall. Between the two was a simple desk under the window and a bedside table beside the bed, leaving much of the floor space open. A second bedroom, identical to the first, sat next door to the door, and opposite that and beside the kitchen was the bathroom. Harry was surprised to see that it even came with a bathtub as well as a shower. But then, if these were set up for families as well as the single dragon handlers, it made sense. The final room through the door at the end of the hallway was a bit of an enigma. It spanned the length of the cabin, but was only 2 meters wide. Currently, it was completely bare. Harry cocked his head at it, trying to imagine what it might be used for. The best that he came up with was either as a storage room or perhaps for kids to room in or play in. For now, he guessed that they'd simply leave it be. "Which room you want, pup?" Sirius asked. Harry shrugged as he looked back to see his godfather lounging in the doorway of the first room. "Doesn't bother me." "Great. Then I claim this one." "After all, it is closer to the kitchen," Sirius laughed before disappearing into his newly claimed room. "I'll give you guys half an hour to get settled, then I'll be back and well take that tour," Charlie said. Harry's eyes lit up at that. The tour. That would, without a doubt, bring him face to face with some dragons. Maybe even Ramaranth herself. "Sounds great," he replied. 0V0800 AM Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. The small settlement, if one could call the 24 cabins, plus the big hall and the half-dozen extra storage huts as such, was placed a fair distance from the dragons themselves. To get from one section of the sanctuary to the other required a bit of a hike up and over a hill, through a section of dense forest that helped to screen the dragons from the humans. The whole sanctuary is warded quite heavily, Charlie was saying as he led Harry and Sirius through the forest. It's unplottable, of course, and has multitudes of both muggle-repelling and even wizard-repelling wards in place as well. The only place in Orotaf, the sanctuary is right where you arrived, and even that can only be done by registered portkeys. That reminds me, Sirius piped up. I am guessing that y'all want this back. Charlie glanced at the dragon tooth that Sirius held out to him before waving it away. Now, we've got loads of teeth as it is. Keep it. But the portkey Harry began before Charlie interrupted. Used. All our portkeys are one-time affairs, Charlie explained. That's nothing now but a simple dragon tooth, and a small one at that. Here, Harry, Sirius said, offering him the tooth. Put a hole in it and a leather thong and wear it around your neck. Charlie nodded. My brother, Bill, has a smaller one he wears as an earring. Harry stopped, his hand on a pine as he blinked at Charlie. Exactly how many siblings do you have? 6, Charlie replied with a grin. You've met my youngest 4 siblings, yeah. Harry nodded, picturing the ones that he'd met at Hogwarts. The twins, Fred and George, and Ron, who was the same age as Harry himself. And then there was the youngest, and apparently only girl, Ginny, who he'd never met but had only heard about as Shed died a couple of years before. Well, there's also Bill. He's the oldest of us all. Then there's me and my next brother down, Percy. He works in the ministry. Bit of a stick in the mud, to be honest, Charlie replied. Come on, we're almost there, and I am betting that there's someone who's anxious to see you. With an excited grin, Harry pushed off, quickening his pace up the final part of the hill and reached it right alongside Charlie. At the sight before him, Harry stopped dead, his jaw slackening as he took in the awesome sight before him. If he'd been asked what he expected a dragon sanctuary to look like, he wouldn't have been able to answer. Even in his wildest dreams, he doubted that he'd pick this. What he saw before him had him itching for a brush in his hand and a canvas before him, and he knew that, before too long, he'd be here, painting the site. The first word that sprang to mind was that it was valley. That, though, wasn't quite right. Canyon might be closer. It was long, easily 10 or 15 kilometers long before it jerked sharply to the right, and Harry lost sight of it. Deep, too. Currently, they were standing on the edge of a cliff that dropped 100 meters down steep rocky cliffs at its shallowest and twice that at its deepest part. The bottom of the canyon was wide as well, easily a few hundred meters across, allowing for a bright blue river to meander through the middle of it. All around the cliff tops were the only source of green that Harry could see. Forests of pines, beech, oak, and elm were easily identifiable, as well as half a dozen others that Harry wanted to get a closer look at later. To the very right, however, through a sparser patch of forest, Harry thought that he could see forests of grass on rolling green hills dotted with something white. Movement down below caught his attention, and he focused on it. And then he saw one. The distance made the dragon look smaller than Harry knew it to be. It had a deep blue-eye-grey hide, making it hard to see against the cliffs. The fact that it de-emerged from a darker patch of cave, Harry realized hadn't helped. But now that he'd seen one, he began to see dozens, both dragons and caves, most often together. The dragons live in caves, Harry noted. Good eye, Charlie nodded. Come on this way. We'll make a quick stop at one particular cave before we head back for lunch and your meeting with Alexander. How dangerous is it to be going down there? Sirius asked as Charlie led them to an obviously well-trod path that snaked its way down the side of the cliff. Ordinarily, very, Charlie replied, glancing back. It's very rare that y'all ever find a dragon handler approaching the dragons by themselves, and we'd never go into the canyon without at least 5 others. Normally, we monitor them from brooms, well above the canyon, and we're ready to get out of there at the first sign of them taking to the air. Then what are we doing? A clearly startled Sirius asked, stopping dead in his tracks. Well, I am betting on something that we've never had before, Charlie replied over his shoulder. What's that? Harry asked. You Charlie grinned at him. You can talk to them. I watched you at the first task. A bunch of us did, actually. We still can't get over what happened that day. That single event taught us more about dragons than we'd learnt in years of working with them. And that's why you're here, Harry. Now get up here and lead the way. I want you ready to tell them that we mean them no harm if they don't like the fact that we're here. Quickly, Harry changed places with Charlie before setting off down the track. It wasn't easy going. The path was steep, and there were patches of loose scree that occasionally had their feet slipping out from under them. Harry kept his head down almost the entire way, watching his footing. Thus, he was surprised when the ground suddenly flattened out. As he stuttered to a stop, he looked back and then up, past Charlie and Sirius, who were both still picking their way down the path. A low whistle escaped him as he saw exactly how far down they'd come. Instantly, he knew that he wasn't looking forward to climbing back up there. He was glad that back in his trunk he had his Nimbus for future trips. Harry, Sirius' sharp, fearful, whispered warning was barely loud enough for Harry to hear. But here he did, and immediately his eyes darted to Sirius' face. What he saw there was pure terror, directed at something over Harry's left shoulder. Slowly he turned and instantly swallowed. Hard. The very ground shook slightly as the 60-foot-long, 6-ton mass of metallic grey dragon stalked towards them. Its wings were currently mostly furled, only standing slightly away from its body, increasing the look of its bulk. But even with all of that mass of muscle behind it, it was the Ukrainian Ironbelly's head that had Harry's whole focus, and really, why would it not? It was, after all, larger than Harry was himself. A pair of jet-black eyes stared at him even as its lips curled back, showing teeth that were decidedly yellow and immensely sharp. "Harry, talk to it," Charlie hissed. "Tell him we mean them no harm." Hello, my name's Harry Potter. We're sorry for disturbing you. We mean you no harm." At once, the dragon stopped, its long, sinewy neck the only part of it that kept moving as it snaked towards him. "You are a speaker," the Ironbelly observed, clearly surprised. As with Ramaranth and the other dragons that Harry had spoken to back at Hogwarts during and after the first task, he noted that the dragon had a distinct accent. This one was especially hard to understand because of it, but by listening carefully, Harry was able to make out what the dragon was saying. "I am," Harry replied. "Do you know Ramaranth, by any chance? I met her a number of months ago, and I was hoping to see her again." Harry didn't think it was possible for the Ironbelly's long neck to stretch any closer to him. He was wrong. As the dragon's neck came within 2 arm lengths of Harry, it turned its head slightly so that Harry could all but see his own reflection in the great eye. "You are the speaker." Harry blinked. Even with the great voice of the massive dragon, it was easy to hear that the dragon had all but whispered the statement, not to mention the capitalization. Before Harry could respond, the Ironbelly reared back onto his hind legs, stretched his neck, and snout high into the sky and trumpeted. Instantly, Harry clapped his hands over his ears at the deafening sound. The great bugle went on, and on for an incredibly long time, not unsurprising considering the lung capacity that a dragon that size would have. And then, interspersed throughout the great trumpeting, Harry heard it. "The speaker has come. The speaker has come. Ramaranth's speaker has come." Even before the Ironbelly's trumpeting had finished, they started arriving. Most came by air, soaring down the canyon, their wings spread wide, their necks extended. Others lumbered along the rocky ground, causing the very earth to shake and rocks to tumble down the cliffs. And then there were a few who simply appeared at the mouth of their cave, their great heads turned in their direction, watching. But it wasn't just the appearance of dozens of dragons of all sizes and breeds bearing down on them that unnerved not just Harry, but the 2 men behind him. No, it was also the sound that accompanied them. More and more dragons joined in with the Ironbelly's trumpeting, making a great symphony of bellows that echoed up and down the canyon, making the very rock walls sing with their music. For it was music, Harry decided. The dragons were happy, celebrating. He wasn't sure exactly how it knew that, but he did. He was certain of it. It didn't take long for Harry's entire field of vision to be filled with dragons, dozens of dragons even. Looking about, he found 3 more iron bellies, as well as Norwegian ridgebacks, Swedish shortsnouts, Romanian longhorns, Hungarian horntails, and even a lone Portuguese longsnout. And every single one of them was staring at him, trying to edge out their fellows to get closer, weaving in their long necks to see him. Glancing back, Harry found that both Sirius and Charlie had retreated. Already they were nearly halfway back up the cliff, and it didn't look as though they were likely to stop any time soon. Hissing from the back of the crowd had dragons big and small shuffling sidewards, creating an aisle amongst them. And through this corridor a horntail strode, looking quite majestic and pompous. That was until she saw him, and all pretense left her as she lumbered forward before coming to a sliding stop in front of him. "Speaker, it is truly you." "Hi, Ramaranth. Harry Grindai did promise that I'd come visit you one day." "You did indeed, Speaker," she replied. "How long will you stay?" Harry looked around at all the dragons and could see the eagerness in all of them. It was their eyes, he finally decided. While it was impossible to read a dragon's body language, their eyes were the most expressive. He was sure of it, not that he knew it. "I have agreed to live here for quite some time," Harry told not only Ramaranth, but all of the dragons, the 2 legs, who look after you, would like me to teach them about you and you about them so that you can all get on better. "You speak truly, Speaker." Ramaranth replied, and Harry wasn't sure if it was a statement or a question. Nevertheless, he decided to answer her anyway. "I do. I will even eventually be visiting all the dragons of the world where they live, to meet them and to learn about them as well. But you will spend most of your time here in our canyon," the iron belly that Harry had first encountered said, and again Harry was unsure if it was a question or statement. "Yes," Harry replied. "I'm sorry, I do not know your name. It was very rude of me not to ask." The ironbelly seemed to puff himself up, standing taller, his head lifting as well. "I am Grulith," he said. Harry inclined his head. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Glulith. It is a pleasure to meet you all." All at once, Harry was bombarded by dragons talking to him at the same time. "Speaker, Ramaranth has told us of painting. Can you show us? Speaker, you must come see my cave." "I am Damrath, Speaker. We are all happy that you have come." "Speaker, my hind foot has been aching. Can the 2 legs help?" "Speaker, make the 2 legs feed us more often." "Enough." Ramaranth bellowed, lifting herself up onto her rear 2 legs. At once, the thunderous dragons stilled, their heads turning to look at the great Hungarian horntail. And it wasn't just the dragons that were watching her. Far above her head, on the cliffs above, it looked to Harry as though the entire complement of dragon handlers of the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary were lined up, staring down at a sight that they had never seen before. "The speaker will come under my wing," Ramaranth stated. "I will escort him to my cave, where he will meet my fledglings. Afterwards, I will show the speaker our canyon." Instinctively, Harry knew that there would be only one correct response. "I would like nothing better," he replied with a bow. Chapter 3. Settling in. 2:10 p.m. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. "He's late," Alexander groused, "not for the first or even the 10th time. You did tell him that we were meeting straight after lunch, didn't you?" "Yeah, boss, I did," Charlie replied, fiercely keeping his desire to roll his eyes firmly in check. "He was kinda occupied," Sirius put in. "Those dragons had him surrounded, and then the big one, Ramaranth, you said, right? Shedd'd lead him off deeper into the valley." With all the other dragons following, Charlie finished, shaking his head. "I've never seen dragons act like that before. Merlin, I've never heard of dragons acting like that before." "True enough," Alexander grunted. "Still, when I say there's a meeting at 1 o'clock, I expect my people to be there on time, not an hour late and counting." "I am not sure that dragons can tell time," Sirius quipped. Alexander shot the man a hard look, and Charlie opened his mouth to say what he knew not, but something that would hopefully smooth things over. Alexander was, for the most part, an easy man to get along with, But when it came to the smooth running of the sanctuary, he simply had no patience for anyone not following his rules. Not that Charlie could blame him. This was a dragon reserve, after all. People who didn't follow the rules more than likely ended up dead. Boss! The panicked yell from outside had the three seated at the table whipping their heads towards the door just as the door crashed open. The wizard standing there was wide-eyed, his chest heaving and his hair was a-flying every which way. Boss, one of the dragons has broken from the canyon. Damn! Alexander swore, standing so quickly that his chair was knocked backwards and sent clattering to the floor. Breed. Size. How high's it going? The wards'll keep it from escaping, Charlie stated, also now on his feet. Alexander shook his head. Those wards might be strong and can give a nasty shock to a dragon, but a determined one could bust through them. Well. This last was said to the handler, who was quickly backing out of the door as his boss strode towards him. Hungarian horntail, fully grown, female by the size of her, was the reply. Ramaranth. Mikos, is it Ramaranth? Charlie asked urgently. Could be. Mikos shrugged. Boss, the dragon's headed this way. Another handler yelled. Wands out. Take cover. Alexander roared, his wand already in hand even as he broke right, dashing towards the side of a building. All around the small compound, handlers were doing the same, running for the nearest cover, be it building, tree, or, in the case of one fast-thinking man, behind the stone wall that he'd just conjured all around him. Sirius and Charlie, though, simply shared a look, and Charlie could see his own thoughts mirrored in the other man's eyes. If this was Ramaranth, and then the great black and bronze dragon appeared from over the treetops. Her wings were outstretched, barely flapping as she soared towards them. She was easily 60 feet long, although with her tail stretched behind her and her head and neck stretched out in front, she seemed much larger. From this angle, it was easy to see her 4 legs tucked up against her great belly. That was until she extended them. At the same time, the Hauntel's head swiveled down and around, and seemingly targeting in on the two of them with her great yellow eye. Her wings flared, and Charlie and Sirius took one last look at each other before breaking away, one left, the other right. Wands everywhere raised, taking careful aim, although, with the Horntail's massive bulk, she would be extremely hard to miss. It wasn't until Shed landed right in the middle of the compound, causing the ground to shake and great clouds of dust to swirl up and around, that anyone realized that there was more to this odd occurrence than they'd first thought. The Hungarian horntail seemed to shift awkwardly, lowering her front right side in a strange lean, but the small figure that revealed itself as it shifted about in the back of the dragon accounted for it. Men and women, handlers that had worked for years, and in many cases decades with dragons, could only stare in bewilderment as a teenaged boy awkwardly swung his leg over the back of the dragon, and then slid down the mountain of black flesh, somehow missing every single bronze spike in the process. The boy, Harry, landed roughly, stumbling, and wands that had been lowered snapped back as the great dragon head twisted about to come snout to body with the teen. Everyone there could hear the hissing that was typical of dragons coming firstly from the horntail and then from the teen. What was even more unbelievable was the way that Harry had laughed, reached out a hand and patted the dragon before stepping back and giving her a short bow. The great dragon head dipped in reply before she crouched slightly and leapt, her wings flapping hard as she fought for height. Handlers everywhere came out of hiding to watch as she twisted about and flew back towards the forest in the direction of the canyon from which Shed come. Harry, Charlie called as he strode towards the boy. Are you all right? Only you, Harry, only you. Sirius laughed as he, too, joined them. Yeah, sure, I am fine. Why wouldn't I be? A puzzled Harry replied before looking at his watch. Damn, I am late. Sorry about that. Good thing Ramarath gave me a lift. Hey, can you imagine how long it would have taken me to climb back up out of that canyon? You rode a dragon, Alexander stated as he joined them, his eyes fixed on Harry. Charlie noted that their boss wasn't the only one staring. Near as he could tell, every one of the 32 dragon handlers at the sanctuary had now surrounded them, each and every one silent and staring at the boy who had just done the impossible. Dragons were the most dangerous creatures on the planet. It was a well-known fact. Even subduing one took, at minimum, 8 wands and a good dose of luck. They weren't creatures Thatnion could take lightly. You didn't go near one by yourself. You didn't attempt to touch one unless Yauk knew that they were unconscious and you had serious backup standing by. And you never, ever even considered sitting on one. Except in every dragon handler's dreams, that every one of them had soared high and far. You rode a dragon, Alexander repeated with a shake of his head. How? Well, it wasn't easy, Harry replied. Not exactly the most comfortable. I kept thinking that I was going to slip off. Thankfully, Ramaranth didn't mind when I grabbed onto the spike that was right in front of me. But how'd you do it? Demi, one of the younger handlers, blurted. How'd you get her told to you ride her? I didn't exactly have much choice, Harry shrugged. She kinda insisted, and I get the impression that what Ramaranth says Ramaranth gets. She insisted. Alexander repeated faintly before shaking his head and clearing his throat. Right, she insisted. You lad are going to shake things up around here. But next time, tell us before you do something crazy and impossible like that. I'll do my best, sir, Harry replied. If it's not too much trouble, could I get something to eat? I kinda missed lunch and I am starved. Charlie wasn't the only one to laugh at that. Sure, Potter, one condition, Alexander replied. You tell us about your time in the canyon this morning. Deal, Harry grinned. 0v0, 2:40 p.m. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. And then I spent the rest of my time in Ramaranth's cave, Harry finished. So you would have seen her fledglings. Dina, Alexander's second, asked eagerly, leaning across the table from where she sat beside the boss. Harry looked up and nodded as he spooned up some stew. Currently, the entire population of the sanctuary was surrounding the table that he was seated at. Everyone was staring at him, focused intently on what he was saying. To be completely honest, he found it a bit disconcerting, something akin to when he first entered the wizarding world, or his first few weeks at Hogwarts. The fact that some of the handlers were even taking notes on what he was saying was enough to make him shake his head. The handbook says that at this age they'll be starting to determine dominance, Miko stated, lofting a dog-eared book and waving it around. Handbook? Harry asked. Dragons, the complete compendium, Alexander answered. Charlie'll get you a copy. Okay, thanks, Harry nodded. Dominance. Let me think. Well, I guess you could say that there was a pecking order. Specketh definitely had the biggest personality. I'd say barely let her brothers and sister get a word in and always wanted my attention. Pains is the quiet one. I had to go over to her before she'd speak to me. As for Parth and Harath, they're definitely somewhere in the middle, too alike to differentiate after a first meeting. Kinda like your brothers, Charlie. Wait, 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 Sirius exclaimed, holding up his hands. His whole body turned to face Harry, a look of immense amusement on his face. Parth, Harath, Specketh, Pains. That's Ramaranth's babies' names. Yeah, Harry replied, feeling his cheeks heating up. A couple of slaps on Harry's shoulders accompanied the laughter that rang through the great wooden hall. You lad are going to do some good here, Alexander said. It's obvious the dragons already love you, and having you to translate means that you're going to be worth your weight in gold. Dina, grab a crew and see about that Ridgeback's hind foot. Left, wasn't it, Potter? Will do, boss, Dina said, rising from her seat. A gesture was enough to have a team of 8 following her from the room. Jacob, Alexander continued, head down to the flocks and do a count. If the dragons are getting hungry, we better make sure none of them have been doing some poaching. A short, heavy-set man with a great handlebar mustache nodded once and promptly disappeared along with 2 others. The rest of you know your jobs. Get to them. In a pack, the rest of the dragon handlers and support personnel dispersed, most out the door, although a few disappeared into different parts of the great hall. Well, you've definitely made an impression, Harry. Charlie grinned at him. Riding a dragon. Wait until that news gets around. There's been a few parselmouths over the centuries working in one reserve of another, but none have ever attempted Torridy in the back of one. Harry stared at Charlie's bemused and shaking head. Apparently, what he'd just taken as a quick, awkward way of getting up out of the canyon was a bigger deal than he'd realized. Alexander slid the folder that was in front of him across the table to Harry, who took it, pushing away his now finished bowl in the process. Your schedule, Alexander said simply. You can go through it properly later. In basic terms, your mornings are for the sanctuary. Charlie, he'll be your master. Master? Harry asked quickly, looking up from the opened folder. Yeah, Charlie's the master, you're his apprentice. Means he's the one responsible for teaching you how the sanctuary works, the tricks of the trade, everything that you need to know to work with dragons, Alexander replied. If you've got a problem, go to him. But if everything goes the way we expect, you'll finish our contract with a magical beast's master certificate under your belt. What about when Harry goes to the other reserves? Sirius asked. Charlie'll be going with you, Alexander replied, which is a bonus for us as well. He'll be learning about the types of dragons that we don't have here and will bring that knowledge back to share with us. He'll also help to tie the reserves closer together. And my afternoons are for my lessons? Harry asked, looking at the piece of parchment that detailed his timetable. And evenings too, Alexander nodded. 'Cause this is just how we'd like things to go. If situations crop up, then it'll get altered, sometimes with little to no warning. I believe the Muggle expression is never work with animals or kids, Charlie said. Harry blinked at him. That's in show business. But I get your point. Animals, dragons don't work to a schedule. Like today when I was supposed to be back here for lunch, but ended up being really late. That's it exactly, lad, Alexander beamed. Doesn't mean that I don't expect you to follow my rules as much as possible. You work for us, not the dragons. You sure about that, boss? Charlie grinned. 0v0, 4:55 p.m. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. For the most part, Harry's magical trunk, which now sat in the middle of the wall across from his desk, had been unpacked. Most of his clothes had been hung in the cupboard or placed in the shelves that he'd found on the left side of the cupboard behind the sliding doors. Above the inside of the door to his room, Harry had found a pair of short, wooden poles, the perfect place to store his Nimbus 2000. The desk, Harry decided, had had to move. No longer was it situated directly under the window. Now it was off to one side, still allowing a view if he sat at it, but also ensuring that there was plenty of room for a very special someone. This is a brand new country, Harry said, stroking Hedwig's chest as she sat on the perch that he'd built for her. There's no telling if there are other owls around or dangers that you're not used to, so be careful going out there. Oh, and keep away from the dragons. I don't think they'd try to eat you, but better safe than sorry. Hedwig gave a soft prick nipped at his ear. Then, with a short hop, she jumped, spread her wings, and soared out through the open window. Turning about, Harry took in his room. It still felt very bare to him, even with the perch, trunk, and broom in their places. With a quick, decisive nod, he crossed to his ebony trunk, opened the third compartment, and raced down the stairs. Within minutes, he was back, 2 pieces of furniture in his hands. The bedside table went between bed and desk, while a focused, wandless sticking charm was used to apply the shelf to the wall above his bed. One more trip down and back up had the last of the items that he was after at that moment, his carving tools, a handful of different types of small blocks of wood, and the figurine of Ramaranth that he'd once carved. All were placed on the shelf above his bed, so as to be close to hand in case he wanted to do some carving at any point. The figurine had been a last-minute decision. Normally, it resided in the special cabinet that he'd made and attached to the wall of his workshop with all of his other figurines. But after a moment's consideration, he decided to have it up here after all. There was not a shred of doubt in his mind that a whole host of dragon figurines would soon be carved to add to his collection. Unpacked? Sirius asked. Still want to bring up my easel and some paints, but that can wait until tomorrow, Harry replied, glancing across at his godfather lounging against the doorframe. Good, come on out, and we can fill in the rest of your timetable with your subjects for each day, Sirius said. Magical as well as normal, Harry reminded him. Sirius simply nodded before stepping out of the way and leading Harry to the dining room table. There, Harry found two pieces of parchment, one much smaller than the other. My timetable, Harry asked, head cocked as he touched the largest piece. Yep. Well, it will be, Sirius replied. Basically, it's an enlarged copy of the one that Alexander gave you, but with enough room now to fill in time slots for the subjects that you agreed to take in the contract that you signed. This last was said as Sirius pointed to said contract, the second piece of parchment on the table. You've already put some thought into this, Harry noted. The timetable had columns for all 7 days of the week, with every morning blocked out with the words dragon stuff written across them. Monday to Friday afternoons were divided up into two-hour blocks, the first from 1 until 3, the second from 3:30 until 5:30. There was also a block in the evenings between 7 and 8:30. I thought that you could do 2 magical subjects every afternoon and then one of your muggle subjects in the evening. Weekend afternoons and evenings are free time or catch up, Sirius suggested. What do you think? I don't see a problem with it, Harry replied. But what about my tutors? Do we know who they are or even if this will work for them? Apart from Remus, who should be arriving the day after tomorrow, I don't have a clue who the reserves have hired for you, Sirius replied. But I can't see it being a problem. After all, Alexander gave you this setup, so you'd assume that he'd worked something out with whoever he's hired already. Harry nodded absently as he ran his eye down the list of magical subjects on his contract. There was nothing there that was new to him, not after his spending the past year at Hogwarts studying them. Most of them he'd really enjoyed, like ancient runes, charms, and transfiguration. Others, like history of magic and astronomy, were okay as far as he was concerned, but not something that he loved. The rest defense against the dark arts, herbology, potions, care of magical creatures, and arithmancy fell somewhere in the middle. Obviously, Remus and Il fit in around the others, Sirius continued, and the fact that we're going to be teaching you 2 subjects each should make it easy for us as well. But I was thinking that we spread out your wand classes so you only have one of them a day. Makes sense, Harry nodded. Serious. You've got 5 evenings blocked out for my normal subjects, but I am only taking 4 art and design, fine arts, mathematics, and biology. I figured that you could do the extra one as a spare in case something comes up. Or for your language classes, Sirius replied. Languages, right, Harry replied, only just then remembering that there was a clause in his contract saying that he was required to learn the 4 main languages of the different reserves around the world. Forgot about them. Over the next quarter of an hour, the two of them debated which slots to assign to each subject. After all, if they were asked for their preferences, which they assumed was quite likely, they actually wanted to be able to answer the question. Finally, they had something that they were both happy with. Right, that's done, Sirius said, as he finally laid his quill down. And just in time, too, it's just about time for dinner, and I've been told that it's the one meal that everyone around here is required to attend. But I had a late lunch, Harry half protested. I am really not all that hungry. Sirius gave him a nonplussed look. I thought you were supposed to be a teenaged boy, and they're always hungry. Then, before he could reply or dodge, Harry felt Sirius' hand close around his bicep, yank him to his feet, and pull him towards the door. 0v0, 6:35 p.m. Tuesday, 25 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. Introductions, names, and faces had come at a steady pace all through dinner. Every single person who worked at the sanctuary, it seemed, had made it their duty to come over to talk to them. From beside him, Charlie had done an amazing job with the introductions, but by the 5th, Harry had already been feeling overwhelmed. By the 10th, names had begun to blur and faces to jumble. Don't worry, Harry, Charlie whispered, leaning close as the last of them, as far as Harry could tell, left to return to their own seat. It might seem that there's a lot of us, but really there isn't. There might not be a lot compared to Hogwarts or something, Harry countered, but I've got more than just human names and faces to memorize. Charlie cocked his head at him, a puzzled expression on his face. Dragons, Charlie, dragons, Harry explained. I had dozens of them telling me their name this afternoon as well, and I dunnot want to find out what an insulted dragon is like if I forget their names or get them wrong. He's got a point, Sirius said from Harry's other side. Yeah, I guess so, Charlie agreed. Never thought of it like that. It's not like we've ever known the dragons' names in the first place in order to have to learn them. That'll be something for all of us to learn, something that Yow'll have to teach us. The idea of making some kind of book with every dragon's name and description, or better yet, a photo, flashed into Harry's mind, but before he could pursue it, a loud knocking on the table that Alexander was now standing at interrupted him. Right, you lot, listen up, Alexander said, causing the hall to quiet within moments. I'll start tonight's announcements with giving a welcome to the sanctuary to Harry Potter and his godfather Sirius Black. If you haven't already done so, make sure you introduce yourselves before you leave here tonight. Lad, you've already proven to us that we made the right choice in getting you here, and you've already done two things that we never thought possible with dragons by going into their canyon alone and then ridding Thebak of one. We look forward to working with you. The hall instantly erupted with not only applause, but also with whistles and yells of welcome and encouragement. All right, that's enough, Alexander said after a minute, and once again the hall quickly settled for him. Assignments for tomorrow. Nothing new apart from the fact that Charlie here's now got himself an apprentice. But if things go the way I expect, be prepared for things to change up as we start learning more about our dragons. That's it from me. Delilah. A woman who looked to be in either her late 20s or early 30s, with long, light brown hair, and a slim figure, rose with a bundle of envelopes in her hand, which she held up for all to see. Delilah's pretty much in charge of a lot of the daily running of the sanctuary, Charlie explained quietly. But I thought Alexander was in charge, a confused Harry said. At that, Charlie shook his head. Alexander's in charge of the sanctuary in terms of the dragons. Delilah looks after all the other stuff that keeps things running smoothly: food, housekeeping. We don't have any house elves here. Portkeys, correspondence. Sirius asked. Don't owls just bring their letters straight to whoever it's for? Not here, Charlie replied. Too dangerous to use an owl. Just think what it'd be like if we were working with a dragon when an owl turned up. Either we'd get distracted and potentially hurt, or the owl would get eaten. No, all mail goes to Delilah, both in and out, and she hands them out once a day. Harry Potter. Harry looked up, blinking. Harry, you've got a letter. Come up and get it, Delilah called. I've got a letter. But I only just arrived, Harry protested even as he was pushing his chair back to get up. I am guessing you're going to want this one, Delilah said with a huge grin on her face. It's obviously been sent by express portkey, and the writing, that's a girl's handwriting if ever I saw it. A few jokes were already being thrown Harry's way at Delilah's comments, but when she lifted the letter up to her nose and smelt it, the whole room, it seemed, joined in on the teasing. Thanks, Harry said as he took the letter. He knew that his face was red and that he'd all but run the last few steps, but the moment that he'd glanced down at the writing on the front, he didn't care. He recognized it. Delilah was right. It was a girl's. Daphne, Harry thought. Chapter 4. Come Fly With Me. 5:50 a.m. Wednesday, 26 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. The sun was barely cresting the horizon as Harry trudged up the hill behind Charlie. Exactly where was walking instead of flying. He wasn't sure, especially as he had his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. But apparently this was how it was done to wake you up and get your blood pumping ready for the day. Right at the top, under the trees where he'd first seen the Great Canyon the day before, Charlie stopped and rested his own broom against a trunk. "Right, first things first," Charlie said. Dragons, the complete compendium. This is everything that every dragon handler throughout history has learnt about dragons. It covers everything about dragons' different breeds, keeping them healthy, different illnesses, and what to do, even what to do with the body if one dies. If you can think of it, it's in here. Read it, learn it. Most of us can all but recite it from memory. From his pocket, Charlie pulled out a miniaturized book and tapped it with his wand, turning it into an exact replica of the handbook that Harry had seen last night. Well, noticeably a replica. This was a brand new copy. Miko's was old, the edges folded up, the pages all dog-eared, and the spine all but cracked in two. "Thanks," Harry said, taking the book. He took a moment to flick through it before noting that Charlie was waiting for him to pay attention again. Passing his hand over the book, Harry closed his eyes and felt his magic, just as Professor Flitwick had told him to. Instantly, the book responded, shrinking down to 1/6 of its size and allowing him to stuff it into the pocket of his jeans. "You, Harry, are just full of surprises," Charlie stated with a shake of his head. "Wandless, wordless magic at your age, with less than a year of magical training under your belt. Right, moving on. The first task every morning here at the reserve is a flyby over the canyon. This gives us a chance to have a basic look at all of the dragons, check that there aren't any problems. After that, we give the okay to those in charge of feeding the dragons to open a section of the wards and allow the dragons out of the canyon for them to go down to the paddocks." Harry frowned and cocked his head at that. "You have to open wards for the dragons to come out of the canyon. But Ramaranth brought me back yesterday without you doing anything to the wards," Harry questioned. "And here's your first big dragon reserve secret," Charlie said, stepping forward, laying one hand on Harry's shoulder and looking him intently in his eyes. "These reserves are almost a myth. Sure, we have wards up to stop not only muggles from stumbling upon us and from magicals getting in and gaining access to the dragons, but the dragons themselves. The wards might give them a bit of sting and encourage them to stay where we'd like them, but if they really want, they can get out. We're certain that they only stay because they not only know that there's a steady supply of food here, but also because they know how dangerous it is out there. But not all dragons live in reserves, do they?" Harry asked. "No, not all," Charlie replied. "There's a handful that live in remote parts of the world, away from humans, but we keep an eye on them as well, at least as best as we can. Mind you, with you joining our ranks, that job might just become a little easier, seeing as you can talk to them." "Well, that's what I am here for," Harry grinned at him. "Exactly, Harry, exactly," Charlie laughed, slapping him on the back before grabbing his broom. "Right, sun's getting higher, which means there'll be light starting to reach the bottom of the canyon. Our job is to fly from one end to the other and back again. Nice and slow, don't want to miss anything. Ready?" Quickly, Harry righted his broom and mounted, barely managing to take to the air a fraction of a second behind Charlie. Together, the two flyers set off over the canyon, with Harry finding that his attention was being split between looking down while at the same time making sure to be aware of where Charlie was so that he kept up and didn't fly off the wrong way or the wrong speed. With the sun still low, the canyon was still mostly dark, making it difficult to actually differentiate between shadows and the cliff faces themselves. All Harry knew was that he was supposed to be looking for the dragons, and specifically, for any problems with them that had developed overnight. Not that he knew what that looked like. He assumed that if there was something, that Charlie would not only point it out, but explain what the problem was. Finally, his eyes began adjusting to the dark, and he saw his first movement of the morning right up against the left cliff face. There wasn't the bulk that he would expect from the body of a dragon, so he could only assume that it was a head. And then it tilted upwards towards them, and Harry caught sight of a glint of a dragon eye. And then, unexpectedly, the dragon came charging out of its cave, its mighty wings unfurling the instant that there was room. A few extra steps was enough for the wings to beat downwards and the dragon to take flight, before quickly angling upwards directly towards them. Merlin. Charlie swore, his broom jerking upwards erratically. That's not normal. Harry, we need to get out of here, away from the canyon. But as urgently as Charlie was barking orders, it was a different voice that had captured Harry's attention. Speaker, you have returned. Are you here to see more of our valley? It's all right, Charlie, he's not going to hurt us, Harry said quickly before switching to parcel tongue. Good morning, great one. I do want to see more of your home. The dragon wheeled about in the sky, his wings outstretched as he soared, his head now level with Harry on his broom. You honor me, speaker. My name is Durzath. The dragon said, may I fly with you? Of course, Durzath. Harry replied, you and your friends can fly with me any time. Apparently, that was the exact right thing to say, for what looked to Harry like a smile appeared on the great Ironbelly's face. And then Durzath let loose with a trumpeting bugle that echoed up and down the canyon. Harry. Charlie asked, his voice warbling as much as his broom was wobbling in the sky. It's okay, Charlie. This is Durzath, Harry said, indicating their flying companion. And that bellow, Charlie asked. Harry laughed. He's happy, and letting the rest of the canyon know that we're up here. And let me guess, inviting them all to join us, Charlie asked. Not exactly, Harry replied. That was their own idea. Up and down the canyon, dragons were appearing from the caves. Some came slowly, others came charging out much like Durzath had done. But no matter how they appeared, what they all had in common was that within seconds, they'd taken to the air. Dragons of all sizes and types filled the canyon, a great flight of them, soaring towards them and taking up formation around the two wizards to either side, above, behind, in front of them and below. And as each dragon arrived, they called a greeting to Harry or trumpeted their welcome. And then the dragons in front of them and below shifted, creating a hole in the air in front of them and a passage from below to that spot. Ramaranth, Harry called happily, and you brought your fledglings. Good morning, Specketh, Harath, Poteth, Pains. Give the speaker your greetings, little ones, Ramaranth instructed. The air was filled with 4 baby dragons chirping away, and Harry could only laugh at their enthusiasm for being up in the sky with their brethren. Harry, it looks to me if all the dragons are here, Charlie said, nervously eyeing the longhorn that had its head bobbing up and down less than an arm's length from him as it rose and fell in its flight. I can see that there aren't any problems. We probably don't need to do this flight today. Harry looked at the dragon handler amusedly. You want to tell them that? Charlie's Adam's apple visibly moved up and down as he swallowed, looking around at the flight of dragons surrounding them. Ah, perhaps not, he replied, fervently shaking his head. Speaker, is today a day we can feast? Durzath asked, sounding hopeful. 0v0, 12:50 p.m. Wednesday, 26 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania, Muni. Sirius boomed, his arms outstretched. You're finally here. Hello, Sirius, Remus replied with a bemused smile on his face. You're looking well, and why shouldn't I? I am away from all those stuffy fuddy-duddies back in England, and in a dragon reserve-off, all places with my godson. And where is Harry? Remus asked, looking about the cabin that Sirius was ushering him into and seeing no sign of said teen. Sirius merely waved a hand towards where Remus had noted a forested hill to be when he arrived. Off with his dragons. Or is that the dragons are with their Harry? Remus blinked at the odd non sequitur. Care to explain that? Well, I guess the easiest way to explain it is to tell you about yesterday, Sirius began. Harry went down to where the dragons are to see the one that he met in the first task. You know, Ramaranth, the one that he painted a picture of. Yes, I remember, Remus nodded. You should have seen it, Moons. He went down into that canyon, and within seconds he was being mobbed. Dozens of dragons flocked to him, all wanting to get close to him. And the noise. Every one of them was, well, Harry says that they were talking to him, but to the rest of us, it just sounded like a whole lot of hissing and roars and stuff. It was before he came back. And get this, he was riding on Ramaranth's back. Once again, Remus blinked, and it was only when he felt a small amount of drool beginning to run down his chin that he managed to snap his jaw back into place. "Humans don't ride dragons," was the only thing that Remus could think to say. "Yeah, well, that's not true for our pup," Sirius beamed. "Okay, I think I understand what you're saying," Remus replied, shaking his head. "And you say that he's with the dragons now?" "Yep, he's due back later. I think Alexander, the head dragon handler's with him this time. Young Charlie Weasley had that honor this morning, almost came back a gibbering mess. I think I am going to need to see Harry with these dragons of his for myself sometime," Remus stated. "Until then, I am hoping that you can tell me what my lodging arrangements are." The fact that Sirius began looking anywhere but at him had Remus instantly on edge. "Padfoot, you told me that you'd arranged a place for me to stay. Well, it was more that I had every intention of having it sorted before you got here," Sirius said, before continuing in a rush. "And I have a solution. You'll stay here." Remus narrowed his eyes at his lifelong friend. He knew Sirius. He always had the best of intentions, there was never any doubt about that, but practically in practice Sirius had this annoying habit of always leaving things until the very last moment. Impulsive, that's what he was. Most likely, he'd thought that arranging things today would be good enough, and had promptly found that things didn't work out the way he'd thought they would. Instead of berating him at that moment, Remus decided to wait until he knew all the facts. With that in mind, he began exploring the cabin. Obviously, there was no place out here in this expanded common area for him to sleep, so he headed for the hallway in the middle of the back wall. To one side were the kitchen and bathroom. To the other were two bedrooms. The first had a pair of beds, one each against an opposing wall with a small bedside table beside them and a single desk under the window in the middle. On the opposite wall was an inbuilt cupboard. With a sigh at what he knew he was seeing, Remus left that room to look at the final two doors. The next room along was obviously Harry's, judging by the distinctive trunk and carved figurines on the shelf above the bed. Closing that door, he went to the final room at the end of the hallway. This one was small, barely wide enough for a bed, if one was happy to have a smaller-than-average-sized bed. "Still ill take this room," he stated, knowing that Sirius was standing right behind him. "What? But that's not a room," Sirius spluttered. "It's barely big enough to be classed as a kid's playroom. No, I've got you set up in with me. It'll be just like back at Hogwarts." "Yes, that's what I am afraid of," Remus replied dryly. "What? We had a fantastic time at Hogwarts," Sirius protested. "Most of the time, yes," Remus replied. "But there's no way that I am putting up with your snoring gagging." "Snoring? Moi, you, sir, have the wrong person." Deciding that it was simply easiest to ignore Sirius when he was in that sort of mood, Remus dropped his bag just inside his new room and headed back towards Sirius' room. "Now, while I am moving the bed and the desk," Remus said, and plowed right over the top of Sirius' spluttering protests, "you can tell me more about Harry and how his schooling is going to work." 0v0, 8:35 p.m. Wednesday, 26 July 1995, Romanian, Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. The frown on Harry's face told anyone that could see it that he wasn't happy. The way that he was cocking his head first one way and then another, not to mention pacing a few steps to one side, pausing, shaking his head, and then taking a few more steps in a different direction before repeating confirmed it. Finally, after nearly 10 minutes of moving from spot to spot, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. Perfect, he thought. And then, to ensure that he didn't lose it, he slowly pulled his wand, taking a careful 4 steps back as he did so. "Calaveria," he intoned, imagining the precise Weasley red of Charlie's hair at the same time. A beam of red magic left his wand, striking the green grass and changing its color just as he wanted. 2 quick, precise swishes produced a red X. After that, it was a simple matter to pull his shrunken easel from his pocket and enlarge it, placing it precisely on the spot that he demarked before adding one of his larger blank canvases. A small table was added to the side, one of his own making. This one had one drawer that held his brushes, another for his palettes, and a third that contained his chalks and charcoals. The top of the table was actually slightly sunken, leaving a rail around its top to keep his various bottles and tubes of paints in place, and easy to see and reach at the same time. Magic, Harry truly believed, was amazing. It allowed him to carry all that he needed so effortlessly and easily, especially when he could shrink it all small enough to fit in his pockets, and then quickly return them to their original size with almost nothing but a thought. Now that he was all set up, Harry stepped just in front of his easel, considering the view once again. From here on the cliff top, much of the canyon could be seen, giving a sweeping, majestic view. The fact that dozens of dragon caves, not to mention quite a number of the dragons currently sunning themselves in the last rays of the sun, could also be seen only added to it. Movement caught his eye, and he shifted his gaze to find the black and bronze of a Hungarian horntail, contrasting perfectly with the orange-tinted sky as it flew by. With a gasp, Harry let go of the dragon tooth, adorned with a carving of the claw mark with the stylized R of the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, that now hung from his neck by a leather thong that he'd been absently fiddling with, and raced back around his easel. Within seconds, a piece of chalk was in his hand, and his hand was moving in quick, precise movements as he began capturing the scene before him. So engrossed was he in his task that he barely even took note when three dragons landed quietly around him, their great necks extending to watch what he was doing. 0v0, 7:20 p.m. Wednesday, 26 July 1995, Minster for Magic's Office, Ministry of Magic, London, England. The evening edition of Daily Prophet was all but scrunched into a ball before being thrown across the room at the fireplace. Unfortunately, Cornelius Fudge had never been particularly athletic, let alone a Quidditch player, and thus, the paper ball, while making the required distance, was off the mark, striking the mantel above and knocking a photo of the minister, standing with the ministers of magic for Bulgaria and France, to the floor and shattering the glass. Thankfully, the short, stubby wand of his undersecretary, Dolores Umbridge, was out in a flash. A quick repairer put things to right before Dolores picked up the photo and returned it to its rightful place. How could this happen? Cornelius asked himself, his undersecretary, and the room at large as he waved his arms around. And why is this Noah's fault? As much as we might not like it, the public do not always see matters correctly, and in the way that we, their superiors, do, Dolores replied. It is our job to steer the misguided back onto the proper path and show them the way in which we wish them to think. Cornelius all but ignored her, used to her flowery way of speaking. Long ago, he'd learnt that she had a way of saying absolutely nothing, even though the words she used gave one the impression that it was the most important piece of information in the world. Ordinarily, the people ate it up and fell into line, not questioning things that they shouldn't. Which was precisely why he kept her around. How were we supposed to control Harry Potter, the boy who lives a ruddy teenager? Cornelius continued. And everyone knows that they have an infuriating habit of doing the complete opposite of whatever an adult tells them to do. One would have expected the boy to be grateful to us, Dolores agreed in a high, girly, simpering voice. After all, we practically gave him everything that he wanted. His emancipation, not to mention the right to defer enrolling in Hogwarts for a year. We even backed him on his ridiculous assertion that he didn't have to dress as a respectable wizard, and offered him a job with proper British dragons if that was what he desired. Teenagers. Ha! Cornelius continued. That's Hogwarts' domain. Dumbledore should have seen this coming and headed him off at the pass. But no, the man had to go and drop the quaffle on this one and let Potter leave the country. To work in a dragon reserve of all places. If anyone's to blame, it's Dumbledore, not us, not the ministry, and certainly not me. Precisely, Minister, Dolores agreed. It was only then that something that his undersecretary had said registered. Stopping in his pacing, he slowly turned towards her. What did you say? He asked. I was agreeing with you, Minister, Dolores replied sweetly. No, no, before that, Cornelius said, waving that reply away. You said something about British dragons. Yes, Minister. I was commenting on the fact that if Potter truly wished to work with dragons, then he should have accepted our offer to work for the ministry, Dolores replied. We even created a whole new subcommittee within the department for the regulation and control of magical animals, just to ensure that he would stay within Britain, an invitation that Potter didn't even have the courtesy to answer, if my information is correct. What was it again? The subcommittee for dragons, Cornelius asked. The subcommittee for the regulation and monitoring of the dragons of Great Britain, Dolores corrected gently. Of course, we have since disbanded the subcommittee, reincorporated its resources back into the department where they belong. Cornelius' eyes flicked to the crumpler Daily Prophet laying on his carpet. The latest article decrying the loss of the boy who lived, and the way the people of Great Britain were angry at their abandonment of him, had detailed what was known of the contract that Harry Potter had accepted. All dragon reserves of the world. That was who he was employed with, and there was one word in that was running over and over through Cornelius' mind at that precise moment. All. Dolores, who was in charge of that subcommittee for dragons. He asked, I believe, that we had placed Mathilda Grimblehawk as chair. A witch with ambition, but little actual experience. I understand, she replied. All. Get her in my office first thing in the morning and clear the rest of my appointments for the day, Cornelius ordered. If we're going to fix this and get Harry Potter back in England, where he belongs, and get the people happy again, and stop them from making any more noises for my resignation, then we need to get on top of this and do things properly. And this Mathilda Grimblehawk might just be the witch that we need to accomplish that. Chapter 5. The Council Speaks. 10:15 a.m. Friday, 28 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. The sound of jaws snapping behind him had Harry twisting about. The fact that the dragon that his gaze pierced instantly froze in place, one front leg raised, and her mouth wide told him that she knew exactly what she was doing. Speaketh, Harry said warningly. But Speaker, the fledgling replied, it looks so fun to play with. Harry's eyes darted to the magical tape that was flitting around panes, while the enchanted quill took notes. Obviously, the way the tape was flying about, measuring different parts of her sister, emulated an insect or a bird, definitely something that would warrant a dragon's natural instinct to snap at and hopefully eat. Just a little longer, Harry told the eldest of the four. The tape should be just about finished measuring panes so that I can see exactly how big she is. And I am mostly through my measurements of Potteth. As soon as we're done, we can go play. Yes, Speaketh replied, but Harry noticed that her eyes never once left the tape as it moved about. Turning back to his own task, Harry tapped Potteth on his side, reminding the fledgling that he was in the process of measuring how wide his wingspan was. Instantly, the wing that had half furled snapped back out to full stretch. Ordinarily, Charlie told him, this was a task that would involve no less than 4 dragon handlers, and their first task would have been to stun all of the fledglings before they'd even begun. And even then, one of the handlers would have been tasked with keeping a careful watch at the mouth of the cave to ensure that neither their mother, in this case Ramaranth, or any other dragon, came near, while the others were getting the measurements as quickly as they could. Today, though, Charlie had simply grinned, slapped Harry on the back and handed him the equipment, sending him off to do the job all by himself. You're the speaker, aren't you? Not to mention a sort of surrogate uncle to those fledglings, Charlie'd said. I am sure you won't have any problems. Snap. Harry spun, expecting to see the magical tape cut in two by sharp dragon teeth. But that hadn't happened. The tape was still happily doing its job, in this case, measuring the length of Payne's tail. His eyes darted to Specketh, and seeing the end of a feather dangling from her snout, he sighed and looked across the cave. Specketh, Harry said, trying hard to keep his voice even, I needed that quill. I am sorry, Speaker. It was too tempting, and you'd said not to eat the flying worm thing. The sound of Horath's hissing laugh did not help matters. I guess that I can do the rest by hand, Harry sighed. But we won't have as much time now to go flying together. The light from the entrance to the cave disappearing, combined with the sound of heavy footsteps, turned Harry's head. But instead of Ramaranth, who he expected, it was a Ukrainian ironbelly blocking the entrance. Gruleth. Harry questioned after his eyes had adjusted enough to the dim light to let him recognize the first dragon that he met when he first arrived. Here is something wrong. Did Ramaranth send you? No, Speaker. Gruleth rumbled in his deep voice. I was sent to bring you to the Weir Council. Harry blinked and cocked his head at the unfamiliar term. Weir, he knew, was the dragon's name for their group that lived here at the sanctuary. But council, that didn't make sense at all. He never picked up on there being an official hierarchy amongst the dragons, let alone something like a government. The fact that all four fledglings had stilled, their eyes appearing larger than normal as they stared between the Ironbelly and Harry, told him that they, at least, knew what this council was, and that they knew that it was a big deal. What council, Gruleth? Harry asked, deciding that gathering more information was required, and quickly at that. Come, Speaker, you will see, Gruleth replied. Can it wait until I am finished here? Harry asked. No, Speaker, Gruleth replied, moving his great head from side to side. You may return here and complete your task after. The council must come first. Harry's eyebrows all but disappeared under his fringe at hearing that. Here was the first time that his wishes hadn't been followed by any dragon. Whatever this was, it was huge. A tiny part of him considered stalling and letting Charlie, or one of the other handlers, know what was going on, but his curiosity was simply overpowering that feeling. All right, Harry said, snatching up the two pieces of tape, the one that he was using and the one still moving about, panes and the parchment, and stuffing them into his bag. Lead on then. 0v0, 10:40 a.m. Friday, 28 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. At Gruleth's urging, Harry found himself walking into one cave that seemed no different or special than any other. The only thing Thatmap considered special was the fact this particular cave was one of the very last ones in the valley, and that it was the farthest cave from the human settlement at that. That was, of course, until he walked 10, 20, diameters into the cave with still no end in sight. Really, cave was a misnomer. Tunnel would be more accurate. The fact that not only Gruleth, but also the four fledglings were following him didn't help either. Conjuring one of his balls of light and willing it to follow just above and behind him solved the problem of not being able to see where he was going. It felt like ages, but could really have only been no more than 10 minutes of steady walking before the tunnel ahead started to become lighter. Unconsciously, Harry's steps quickened. That was before he stepped out of the tunnel. What he found stopped him dead. Cave was too small a word. Cavern really wasn't much better. Amphitheater in the middle of a mountain might be the closest that he could come up with, and it was. A great big domed space that stretched up so high that Harry couldn't actually see the roof from where he was standing at the bottom. The walls, though, weren't perfectly smooth. Instead, there were dozens and dozens of ledges all around, and on each and every one rested a dragon. Harry wasn't entirely sure exactly where the light was coming from. His best guess was some sort of strange crystal embedded haphazardly into the walls all around the chamber. Whatever it was, the soft golden glow that each produced provided more than enough light to see by. A nudge in his back propelled him forward before he stumbled to a stop. The flap of wings beating down behind him, accompanied by the gust of air that ruffled his clothes, told him that Gruleth had taken to the air, quickly followed by the fledglings. Eyes wide, Harry turned in a circle to take it all in. Dragons of every size and species found at the reserve peered down at him, their great eyes all fixed on him. Harry didn't need to count. Every dragon in the reserve was obviously present. Speaker, we welcome you. Harry turned to his left to find the largest Hungarian horntail that he'd ever seen stepping forward from where he'd just stepped from one of the lowest ledges. "Great one," Harry said, giving a bow while ensuring that he also dropped his eyes. This was one dragon that Harry had never encountered at the sanctuary, and before this, he would have sworn that he'd met every dragon that lived here. "May I inquire what your name is?" Harry continued. "I am Memzath," the dragon replied, lowering his head until the bottom of his snout all but rested on the ground, and even then, the top of Harry's head was still nearly a meter below Memzath's eye. "What is this place? Why am I here?" Harry asked. Memzath lifted his head, his neck curving up before his head, twisted to look back down at the single human. "This is the Weir Council," Memzath replied. "It is here that the good of the Weir is determined." Harry blinked at the horntail. This was completely foreign territory. While he'd known that the dragons were intelligent, with him being the only parselmouth at the reserve, no one really knew much about the social structure of the dragons that lived here, or in any of the reserves around the world. "And you are here, speaker, because you do, in fact, speak. You are speaking to us, but before you may speak for us, we need to be certain that you will speak the words that we want," Memzath stated. Once again, Harry wasn't sure exactly what to say. In the end, he decided that he could only try to assure not only Memzath, but all the dragons here that he could be trusted. "I have only ever wanted to be your friend," he said. "Even from when I first met Ramaranth and the others at the Triwizard tournament, I never wanted to hurt dragons or do anything that you would not like." A short bugle from high to his left had both Harry and Memzath turning to look. "Speak, Ramaranth," Memzath commanded. "I vouch for the speaker and the truth of his words," she stated. 4 tiny bugles from around her told Harry that her fledglings were adding their support for him as well. "Your voice is noted," Memzath acknowledged, "and if it was not for the darkness that has been sensed, then that would be enough." "Darkness?" Harry asked, confused. He had no idea what Memzath was referring to, but it sounded suspiciously like the great horntail was implying that he, Harry, was dark. Or bad, evil even. "Darkness," Memzath repeated. "There is a smell of darkness within you, speaker." "Within me?" Harry squeaked through the sudden lump in his throat. He certainly didn't like the way that Memzath was currently looking at him. "Perhaps within is the wrong word," Memzath said, his great head turning slightly and lowering so that he was now looking at Harry's face more closely. "Perhaps at Ashedto, you is the correct term." That, Harry decided, didn't sound any better. Attached to him. "So this darkness that you smell, it's not a part of me?" Harry asked, trying to understand. "It is and it is not, speaker. Perhaps it can be dealt with." And before Harry could comprehend what was being said, Memzath's front paw lifted, his claw extended, and he swiped straight at Harry's face. Instantly, intense pain blossomed in Harry's head, and he let out a piercing scream that reverberated around the cavern. His hand slapped wetly against his head, directly over where his lightning bolt scar was. And then the pain intensified, 10, 100, 1,000-fold. Darkness closed in, and the world around him vanished as he collapsed into unconsciousness. 0v0, 11:10 a.m. Friday, 28 July 1995, Weir Council Cavern, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. The bellows and roars that erupted all around the cavern would have deafened any human there. The fact that the body of the only human there had just shut down meant that he didn't hear any of it. And then, in an instant, the protesting dragons stopped. But where one would expect complete silence, there was, instead, an eerie, unearthly wail. From the speaker's forehead, where he now lay unconscious on the hard stone, a wisp of vile, poisonous green mist erupted. The mist twisted and tuned about itself, as though it was attempting to keep every part of it together. And from this mist came that strange cry. Memzath's head shifted upwards in line with the mist, his eyes watching, his senses tasting. Yes, this was the source of the darkness that he had sensed from within the speaker. Whatever this was, it was wrong, evil, a darkness that did not belong. When Memzath judged that the mist had risen high enough, he let loose with a long, thin, blue-white flame. The intense heat enveloped the mist before it simply ceased to be, as all things touched by dragon flame were wont to do. That was the cue for the great bellowing roars of the assembled dragons to begin once again. Only this time, the dragons were rejoicing, trumpeting and bugling, being liberally mixed from many in attendance. Memzeth allowed it to go on for some time before his deep trumpeting bugle brought the weir back under control. The darkness that had a hold of the speaker is no more, he announced, perhaps unnecessarily. The speaker, Durath asked. Before answering, Memzeth lowered his head so that his snout was close to the speaker's face. A puff of air, while nowhere near the intensity that it could be, was still hot enough to leave the speaker's forehead glowing red. The blood and black gunk that had poured from the scarred wound dried instantly. Memzeth's long tongue washed it clean, and he tasted that the speaker's magic was entirely his own. He lives and is whole, Memzeth declared. And how do you judge him, Memzeth? Ramaranth asked. After taking one final sniff, taking one final sense of the speaker's magic and self, the weir leader lifted his head and took in the dozens of dragons, all eagerly awaiting his verdict. I judge the speaker worthy. Once again, great trumpeting bugles echoed around the cavern, declaring the weir's agreement and celebration of the pronouncement. Only after the dragons had settled did Tyriath, the eldest of all dragons at the weir, slowly step down from his ledge and plod across the center of the bowl. Tyriath, Memzeth asked, bowing his great head in respect. The speaker has been declared worthy. I ask what we intend on telling him, how much of our great history, how much of dragon lore, what ancient secrets is he truly worthy of? Forget not, he is still a two-leg, and one who is still young in years, the ancient dragon stated. There was a distinct rumbling around the chamber as dragon discussed with dragon these important questions. None, it seemed, had given much thought to what having a speaker with them meant beyond that of having a two-leg who they could talk to and who would listen to them and speak for them. The speaker has shown that he wants to learn, Memzeth stated slowly. There is much truth in your words. Memzeth Ramaranth said that he has listened to us and told the other two legs what we want and need, and they have begun changing their ways. The speaker flies with us. He made them give us more food. The ache in my hind foot has been healed. The speaker carries two-leg writings, a book he called it. Damrath added that he tells words from this and asks what is truth and what is dung. He remembers what we tell him and has promised to teach the two legs. How many moons will the speaker remain in Weir? Tyriath asked. The speaker will visit all Weirs, the tiny voice of Spekith volunteered. All Weirs. That I do not believe, Tyriath said, moving his head slowly from side to side. All Weirs that the two legs have created perhaps, but not all Weirs that contain dragons. What of the other Weirs? Memzeth asked should the speaker not be told. Again, there was much rumbling debate within the cavern before Tyriath stamped one of his feet. While Norwegian ridgebacks were not as large or as heavy as horntails or even ironbellies, Tyriath had the gravitas to instantly claim silence from all dragons. I propose that the speaker be only told what he needs to know when he needs to know it. Memzeth, though, decided to add to the proposal. Our smallest brethren and near cousins should remain Weir secrets, even from the speaker for now. The other Weirs, those dragons who have established their own Weirs apart from the two legs, they may need the speaker to speak for them, that he may be told as he needs, he declared. The rumbling of the dragons this time was punctuated by trumpets and bugles of some of the younger or more vocal of the dragons. And what of the speaker now? Ramaranth asked Dati, is not able to move under his own power. Memzeth lowered his head slightly in combined acknowledgement and to look at the unconscious two-leg before him. Ramaranth, we entrust the speaker into your care. Return him to the other two legs, he said. Yes, Memzeth, she replied before spreading her wings and gliding down from her ledge to the floor of the cavern. 0v04:05 p.m. Friday, 28 July 1995 Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. How long do you think he'll sleep? An anxious Sirius asked. even as he hovered on one side of the bed that his godson was currently lying unconscious in. Your guess is as good as mine, Remus shrugged, his own eyes firmly fixed on the face of the sleeping teen. The healer said that he was fine, apart from the fact that his magic levels were all going haywire, but if he rested for at least a day and didn't use his magic at all in that time, then he'd be fine, Sirius concluded. I know that, Mooney, Iwasha, too, remember. Then stopping being a worrywart, Remus near-snapped, a couple'll be fine. Sirius couldn't help but snort. Cauldron kettle. Black Remus finished, a touch of a wry grin on the corners of his lips. I get it, Sirius. We only just got him back. We're both overly sensitive about losing him or something happening to him. But Harry won't appreciate our hovering, Sirius sighed, running a hand along the back of his neck. That kid's had a hard life. You and I both know that. He's had to grow up way faster than he should have, and he's missed out on an awful lot. And then, when he finally came back, all that boy, who lived nonsense combined with the fame that went with the Triwis and his marauder-level way of doing the tasks marauder-level. Remus grinned, shaking his head. I doubt any of us would have dared to make a mockery of the Triwis like he did. I feel insulted, Sirius replied with a mock-hurt hand on his heat. Maybe I would have competed properly, but both James or E would have done our best to make a farce of the whole thing. No, you two would have made a mockery of the Triwis while still trying to win, Remus countered. Harry didn't. Mr. Padfoot bows to Mr. Mooney and concedes the point, Sirius said after a moment's consideration. As you should, Remus nodded smugly before his eyes once more fell on Harry and his face fell. And now he has to contend with that. The eyes of both men latched on to the same spot, the once was lightning bolt scar on Harry's forehead. When he'd first been brought back in the claws of a dragon, no less Harry'd been unconscious, and most of his face was covered in dried blood, and something else that no one could identify. Very quickly, though, he'd been cleaned up, and then they'd seen it. The lightning bolt scar that had adorned Harry's face for most of his life now had a vicious, straight, vertical line straight through it that started 2 finger widths above the original scar and finished the same length below it. And if that wasn't already more than enough, there was something else, something remarkable about it. It wasn't the normal color that one would expect from a wound, not a fresh wound or even a wound that had been healed for any length of time. No. This wound, this mark, even after being as magically healed as possible, was a vibrant bluish purple and stood out like no other wound or scar that any one of them had ever seen before. About the only good thing about this new scar was the fact that it did detract from the remains of the famous lightning bolt. Alexander and Charlie, though, the instant that they'd seen it, had nearly fallen over backwards from where they'd been crouched over Harry lying on the dirt. Neither had been able to tear their eyes away from the mark, much like Sirius and Remus had had their eyes constantly and continuously drawn to it in the hours that they'd been standing by Harry's bed since the healer had left. Both, though, couldn't stop remembering the odd whisper that had escaped Alexander when he finally did find his voice. And not one of them, not Harry's guardians, not the healer, and not even the dragon handlers themselves, knew exactly what it was going to mean for Harry in the short or the long term. The Mark of the Dragon. Chapter 6. The Mark of the Dragon. 9:10 a.m. Sunday, 30 July 1995, Romanian, Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. Unlike at most other times, Harry jolted awake. 1 second he was asleep, the next his eyes were wide, and he was looking around from where he was unexpectedly now sitting on his bed. His bed. He didn't remember coming to bed. Come to that, he didn't even remember returning to camp. A glance out of his window told him that it was daytime. What was puzzling, though, was the position of the sun on the trees. Morning. How can it be morning? He wondered. He distinctly remembered being down in the canyon with the dragons in the afternoon. But then more of his memory returned. Yes, he'd been in the canyon, in with the fledglings, until Gruleth interrupted. And then he was taken to a secret dragon council. All the dragons had been there, including a dragon that he'd never seen or met before Memzath, the Weir leader. Absently, Harry flicked a finger, and from across the room, a piece of wood dislodged itself from the pile that he'd stacked beside the door and flew to him. Unerringly, he caught it before frowning down at it. Black locust wood, native here in Romania, thus why he'd picked it up. It certainly didn't live up to its name. It wasn't black or even a dark-colored wood. Still, it intrigued him, having a type of wood that he hadn't worked with before. Memzath, his brain returned to its original thoughts, even as he grabbed up his carving tools from the shelf above his bed. Memzath had been concerned with something, with him. The great dragon had kept saying that there was a darkness. The memory of the slashing pain in his forehead had Harry dropping the knife and slapping a hand over his scar. But the familiar feel that he'd had longer than he could remember had changed. Lightly, he traced the scar. There his fingers found the familiar lightning bolt, only now it felt like there was an extra scar, a slash that went straight through it, from top to bottom. It was definitely a strange feeling to know, but not know something that was a part of you. And the extra ridges that the frown that he was wearing wasn't helping either. A glance around his room only deepened his frown. There was no mirror in here. The best that he had was snatching up his knife again. He held it so that he could look into the blade and see his reflection. It wasn't easy or the best of mediums, but it at least allowed him to see a weird bluish-purple line on his head, slashed straight through his lightning bolt. "What the?" he began just as the door opened. "Harry, you're awake," Sirius exclaimed loudly. And then his godfather was across the room, and Harry had to quickly put the knife down for fear of stabbing the man as he raced to hug him. The feeling of his hair being ruffled alerted Harry to the fact that Sirius hadn't been the only one entering his bedroom. Finally awake, cub, Remus smiled down at him. "We thought you might miss your birthday with the way that you were going." "Miss my birthday?" Harry echoed. "Exactly how long was I asleep?" "A day and a half," Charlie replied from just inside the door where he stood beside Alexander. "Today's the 30th. And in case you were wondering, it's just after 9 in the morning." "I slept for a day and a half," Harry's exclaimed. "What? Why? What happened?" "We were hoping that you could tell us that," Alexander said, and Harry noted that the weathered face had a distinctly interested look on it. "I think we'd all like to hear that story, pup," Sirius said. Harry looked from his godfather sitting on his bed, to Remus standing beside him with his hand, now resting on Harry's shoulder, to the extremely eager looks on both Charlie and Alexander's faces. "I am not sure that I completely know," Harry shrugged. "Tell us what you remember," Remus said lightly. "Well, I was in with the fledglings, getting those measurements that Charlie wanted," he began. "We found the parchment and tapes in your pocket," Charlie nodded. "Looks like you did good work." "Thanks," Harry grinned. "Although I am now a quill short, Specketh ate one of them. I was close to finishing when Grulith interrupted. He wanted me to come to the Weir Council." "Council? What council?" Alexander asked sharply, clearly confused. "Are you saying that the dragon shave some sort of government?" Charlie spluttered. "Yep," Harry grinned. "You should see it. It's this huge cavern, so high I couldn't even see the roof. And there are all these ledges built into the walls for the dragons to sit on. And in the middle, on the floor, is where the Weir leader stands to talk with all the other dragons." "Weir leader," Alexander said, shaking his head. "Which dragon's that? And where's this cavern?" Charlie added at the exact same time. Harry looked from one to the other, deciding which to answer first. "His boss," he decided. "The Weir leader is Memzath. He's a horntail, pretty old, definitely one of the oldest dragons here, and not one that Id met before. And as for where the cavern is, it's at the end of a long tunnel felt like I walked down it for at least 10 minutes inside the last cave in the canyon. The one that the dragons never let us near." Charlie speculated, looking at his boss. "On the right-hand side." "Yeah, reckon so," Alexander said. "What's the odds that this Memzath lives there?" "Pretty good, I'd say," Charlie nodded. "But what happened in there, Harry?" Sirius prompted. "Obviously something big, since Ramaranth had to carry you back here unconscious." I am guessing it's got something to do with how you got that mark, Alexander said, stepping forward and gesturing to Harry's forehead. Once again, Harry's hand rose to trace his scar, only this time it was solely the new portion of it. Yeah, Harry replied grimly. The dragons wanted to test me. Said something about that, even though I could speak to them, that they needed to be sure that I could speak for them. And then Memzath started saying something about how I was dark. No, that's not quite it. That there was a darkness at a shed to me. And the next thing I knew, Memzath slashed me with his claw. I think I passed out after that. At least that's the last thing I remember. A darkness attached to him, Sirius echoed, looking up at Remus. No idea, Siri, Remus shrugged. I may be a master of defense against the dark arts and a dark creature myself, but I am not a dragon. Who knows what they can see or sense? You are not a dark creature, Sirius growled. You just have a special problem at that time of the month. The dragons didn't explain more. Alexander asked, seemingly ignoring the two men. Harry shook his head. No, or at least not to me or while I was awake. But what about the mark? Charlie asked. That was the second time that Harry had heard that term, and this time he caught the capital letter, the fact that it was something important. Mark, he asked. Alexander stepped closer and pointed at Harry's new scar. That is the mark of the dragon, he stated, and Harry wasn't sure whether he was in awe of it, scared of it, or intrigued by it. Mark of the dragon, Harry repeated. What's that? That is something very special. Very special and extremely rare, Alexander replied, his eyes firmly fixed on the mark in question. There's been less than a handful of people in all of history that have been given a mark, and you have to be given it. You can't demand it or ask for it or anything. It's completely up to the dragons themselves. We're not even certain how it's given. Our best guess, and mind you, this comes from some ancient writings in a language that's long since fallen into disuse, is that it's a combination of the dragon's claw, saliva, breath, and magic. Don't look at me, Harry told the assembled men who were all staring at him. I am just as clueless as all of you. But what does it mean? Legend tells us that a person who has the mark can control and command all dragons. They'll do your bidding. They'll come and go as you ask. And they'll go to war against anyone or anything that dares to try to harm you. For all intents and purposes, anyone with that mark is considered a dragon themselves, and not just any dragon, but also their king and their champion, Alexander stated. Harry's mind had all but shut down by the end of his boss explanation, even as his eyes had only grown wider and wider. Champion, Harry whispered, latching onto the last word. Champion, or speaker. He looked up from where his head had dropped. They wanted to know if I was worthy enough to speak for them, he said. I'd say that they gave you your answer, Charlie replied. You said that your understanding of what it means to carry this mark of the dragon comes from ancient writings, Remus said. How certain are you of your interpretation? As best as we can be, Alexander shrugged. Of course, some of that could be exaggeration, but I doubt it's much, if anything. Harry, it might not be a bad idea for you to start keeping a record or something like a journal of all the things that you're learning about dragons, including what the dragons say this mark represents, Remus suggested. Make it a book, Charlie suggested. Every dragon keeper in the world would want a copy. Make it a book and sell it, Sirius said, expanded excitedly. Dragons have always fascinated everyone. You could make quite the cauldron of gold by selling it to regular witches and wizards as well, not to mention schools. It could even become a textbook. Harry looked at Charlie and Sirius, and then up at Remus. I might do that, he said. The writing it all down part, not writing a jolly school textbook. And in the meantime, perhaps you can get the great behemoth that's been sitting in the middle of camp to go back to the canyon where she belongs. Alexander asked. Harry cocked his head, not understanding. Ramaranth, Charlie explained. She hasn't moved since bringing you home. That was enough for Harry. In a rush, he scrambled from his bed and raced for the door. Exactly as he'd been told, his first dragon friend was crouched just outside the cabin. Her head was pointed at the door, and even though her eyes were half-lidded, Harry was certain that she was very aware of everything that was going on around her. "Speaker," she said, lifting her head. "I sensed you coming. Are you recovered?" Harry skidded to a halt, blinking up at her. "Ramaranth. You sound different. Your accent's changed," he said. A rumble erupted from Ramaranth's throat in what Harry knew to be a laugh. "It is not I that has changed their speech, but you, speaker." She told him, "You no longer speak with the sound of a belly crawler. Instead, you speak truly as you should, as our speaker." His accent had changed. Belly crawler. Harry could only guess that she meant like a snake, which was what Parseltongue was most known for, snake language. And then the other part of what Shed said registered. Our speaker, Ramaranth, had said. He guessed that that meant that he'd been found worthy. "I will return to the others and tell them of your recovery," she said, before he could reply. "Until soon, speaker." With that, she spread her great wings and jumped, her long neck leading as she left the ground, beating up until she was above the cabins and the trees before wheeling away towards the canyon. 0v02, 40 p.m. Sunday, 30 July 1995, Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, Romania. A louthump the ground just through the trees had Remus wondering if he really had chosen the best place to hold his first lesson with Harry. Had that this little clearing, just back from the edge of the canyon and a little inside the tree line, would be perfect, somewhat private, and with the added bonus of being a peaceful, natural spot that should help this lesson in particular. What he hadn't counted on were the dragons. This was the second that had landed since they'd arrived, and while they weren't venturing in through the trees, they were definitely watching. Taking a breath, Remus decided that the best thing that he could do was to ignore them and to get on with what he wanted to teach. When you went to the Dragon Council, Remus began and marveled at the string of words that he'd never thought would belong together. "You didn't let us know." Why was that? "Well, Grulith was quite insistent that we had to go then," Harry shrugged. There was no time to return to the camp to let anyone know what was happening. Remus nodded. "I thought that was the case, and that brings us to the point of today's lesson. Watch. Expecto Patronum." Instantly, a large, silver, ethereal wolf appeared from his wand. It trotted around them, its nose up in the air before coming to face Remus. A message to Sirius. "I have begun the lesson," Remus told it. Instantly, the silvery ghost-like wolf bounded off, quickly becoming lost to sight. "What was that?" Harry asked, wide-eyed. "That was a patronus," Remus replied. Or more specifically, a messenger patronus. Lifting his finger, he cut off Harry's likely questions. A patronus is a charm which manifests itself as an animal, a guardian if you will. Primarily, it's used to defend against dementors, and Letherfold's a lesson for another day. Our aim at the moment is to have you able to create your own patronus, which will then lead on to you being able to use your patronus to send messages as you saw me do just now. Patronuses. Patronae. Harry shrugged and shook his head. The plural didn't really matter. They take the form of animals. "What will mine be? That we won't know until you can successfully cast one," Remus smiled. "However, it will be unique to you. After all, it is a part of you, something that defines you. Mine, as you saw, is a wolf. Sirius is a dog. Your father's was a stag." "It was?" Harry asked interestedly. "What about Mum?" "A doe," Remus smiled. "Cool," Harry grinned in return. "So how do I cast it?" "This isn't an easy charm to master," Remus warned. "There are many adult witches and wizards who are never able to produce a patronus for one reason or another. It takes a lot of power, which I believe you have, and a firm grasp of a positive, happy memory. The rest is simple. The wand movement is a simple point, and the incantation is, as you heard, expecto patronum. You know that I don't always need my wand to make magic, right?" Harry asked. "I am very aware of that, Harry. However, due to the difficulty of this spell, I think the added power and control that using a wand will give you is necessary," Remus said. Once Harry had pulled his wand, Remus nodded and continued. "What I want you to do is to close your eyes," he said, intentionally keeping his voice mellow, letting the cadence of his words help to, hopefully, Relax, Harry. I want you to search your memory, find a time when you were clearly happy, a time when you were most enjoying life. It's okay to discard one memory in favor for another. In fact, I expect you to. More often than not, it takes a little trial and error. For now, though, pick a memory where you felt great joy and happiness. He watched as Harry's face went through a myriad of emotions. There was the frown of concentration, the headshake and almost growl of something that he instantly discarded, contemplation and consideration. And finally, a slow grin began forming on his face, and Remus knew that he had a memory that was worth, at the very least, trying. It looks to me as though you've found that memory, he said. Now, I want you to relive it, experience it all again. You don't have to tell me what it is. It's enough that you know it, that you remember it. Let the feelings that engulfed you that day fill you now. Feel that happiness, that joy, that love if that's a part of it. Let those feelings consume you until they fill every part of you. Remus continued watching Harry's face. Finally, he thought the teen had it, was ready for the next part. Now, when you're ready, I want you to raise your wand. You know the incantation, Expecto Patronum, Remus said and waited, watching. Slowly, Harry's wand came up, his eyes still closed. Expecto Patronum, Harry incanted. Not unexpectedly, nothing happened. Push your feelings into your magic, Remus coached. Feel it and push. Expecto Patronum. Harry cast again. Remus could see the strain on his face as he continued pouring his magic into the spell. And then a stream of white, gossamer thin magic appeared from Harry's wand. It wasn't much, a trickle at best. But still well done, Harry. Very well done indeed, Remus exclaimed. But I didn't make an animal like you or Mum or Dad, Harry panted, his hands on his knees. It was barely anything. Harry, I never expected you to, at least not today, not in your very first lesson, Remus told him as he pulled a block of chocolate from his pocket and began unwrapping it. As I told you, this is a spell that not every adult can do. It's extremely advanced. The fact that you managed anything is simple, astounding. But now that you've begun, we can continue to work on it. But I wanted to see what my animal was, Harry complained, even as he took the piece of chocolate that Remus had snapped off for him. And you will, just not today. It was definitely hard, much harder than I thought it was supposed to be, Harry said. Are you sure that I was doing it right? It may be that you weren't using a strong enough memory, Remus said, and that shall be your homework. I want you to search your memories, see if you can't find a better memory to use. Remember, it has to be one full of great, positive emotion. It can't just be something that was positive or good. It's the emotions that really count with this spell. Remus saw Harry's eyes dart towards the pair of dragons that were still watching. Can I try it once more? He asked. Are you sure that you've got enough in you to try? Remus asked. Producing the mist that you did took a lot out of you. I am sure, Harry replied. In reply, Remus simply waved his hand. He watched as Harry's eyes darted to the dragons once again before he squared his shoulders. Expecto Patronum. Once again, silvery mist appeared out of Harry's wand. This time, though, it happened much quicker and was definitely a little stronger. It still wasn't strong enough to form a shield, which came before the animal patroness itself, but there was no doubt that it was stronger. Before long, Harry let it go and dropped to his knees, his head down and his shoulders heaving as he panted. That was exceptional, Harry, Remus exclaimed, handing over more chocolate. But I think that's quite enough for one day. Yeah, you're probably right, Harry conceded. But I really did want to find out what my patroness animal is. Remus didn't reply, instead just waiting for the teen to recover enough to walk back to the cabin. His eyes slid to the two dragons watching them, and he wondered if Sirius would be up for betting on Harry's patroness form. What was he saying? This was Padfoot. He'd bet on anything at the drop of a hat. A grin appeared on Remus' face. There could be some gold to be made here. 0v0, 7:20 p.m. Sunday, 30 July 1995, Studland, Dorset, England. Tina. There's no need to shout, Newt. I am right here, exactly where I was sitting the last time you saw me, not 15 minutes ago, Tina Scamander scolded her husband. Oh, of course, he replied. But have you seen this? She looked from the piece of parchment that he was waving in his hand to the owl currently sitting on his shoulder. Considering that looks like a letter that just arrived, it'd have to say that. No, I haven't seen that, she said. What is it? It's from a friend of mine down in Tanzania, the Dragon Reserve there, actually, Newt replied. You're not thinking of going on a trip to the Tanzania Dragon Reserve, are you? It's the Draconian Sanctuary of Tanzania, actually, but no, of course not, Newt replied. I am planning on going to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary. Tina sighed and closed her eyes. Even after all these years, her husband's mind was hard to keep track of. Leaving aside the fact that you are a 99-year-old man that should be enjoying his retirement instead of going traipsing around the world, Tina said, kindly explain to me you want to go to Romania. Well, you see, something extraordinary has happened, Newt replied excitedly. There's a new parselmouth working with the dragons Harry Potter. Yes, we know, it's been all over Thedley Prophet for weeks now, Tina supplied. Yes, yes, but there's more, you see, Newt continued. It seems that 2 days ago, Harry Potter was given the mark of the dragon. It's most extraordinary, very fascinating. Imagine what he could learn, what he could teach us. Tina stared at her husband. He got this same gleam in his eye every single time there was the chance to learn something new about any of his creatures. And she also knew that there was no stopping him when he got like this, not that Shed ever really tried. It was a part of him, a part of what made him the great man that he was, and a large part of why she loved him so much. Very well, she conceded. But I expect you to actually tell me exactly what this mark of the dragon is while we pack, and exactly why it's so special. And Newt, we're leaving that suitcase of yours behind this time. You managed to find enough trouble on your own without adding in everything that suitcase entails to the mix.